said, look, guys, just be open-minded to the evidence. But by the way, these dishonest apologists and their sheep of an audience just want to believe. So they're going to come up with these lame excuses to dismiss this. So, but, be open-minded. Except when they're around, we need to make sure you're primed to think that they're really just evil or retarded or something like that. He has no problem telling his audience to be closed-minded when listening to us, but other places be open-minded. Which is it? Come on. This is why this documentary is so long. There's so much fluff like that, which is not only dishonest, Derek, it is downright rude.
Then after she's dead, her dead body is hung on a hook. It's not crucifixion. Then, after a little while, she's brought back to life. Now, anyone notice I'm missing the concept of 3 days and 3 nights? Not in there. It's in the text.
Oh, it isn't.
But where is it?
Oh, so it's not in there, but it's in there.
So she says, this is a not speaking to her servant.
He's either really not smart, has bad reading comprehension, or is very dishonest, and I think it's the latter.
Joshua Bowen wrote me a letter, but not only wrote me a letter, he said, I already talked to Jones about this, so I don't know why he drew that conclusion.
So let me get this straight. And Jones was shopping around for a serialologist, trying to get the right answer that he liked.
Yep.
If he didn't get the answer he liked, he ignored it and went right to the apologist.
And I am just apologist in denial because there's so much evidence from before Christian texts that Dionysus turned water into wine.
Jones is wrong about just when this was even dated. So he's coming in, he's an authority. He runs in and goes, it's post-dates the New Testament. It's a 3rd century text that Dionysus turns water into wine. And then he goes, shut up. Everyone laughs.
Dionysus turned water into wine. Yeah, that comes from a 3rd century text. Post-dates the New Testament. Shut up.
We could see structural and thematic similarities with John's gospel.
What? I'm sorry, what? What similarities? Beyond vague generalities.
He's not serious, in my opinion. He's not coming seriously. He's not trying to find the truth. He's trying to find whatever. He's shopping around for scholars that agree with him. He's disregarding scholars that don't agree with him. To me, that's a sign of a person who is not serious.
Here's the problem with a lot of this stuff. Okay, I believe it's not was a Roman-wide thing. I think this was just associated with certain villages in Macedonia. But the January 6th date is not in John. This came from centuries later.
Yeah.
Okay. This came when Christians are trying to distance themselves from pagans. They're going to do this then. In the Feast of Epiphany was a minor feast. If you were trying to copy this, why not place the resurrection date? I mean,
right.
There's just a lot of problems here because again, this is not in John. This is not in the Bacchae. This is something else entirely. It's coming about much, much later. I think this is even coming after the Donatist split, for example. So pretty late. I mean, we're talking about after Constantine at this point. Yeah, lot of problems here. With trying again, it's because it's not in John. We've moved into a completely different area, though, in terms of what the Christians are doing. So let me get this straight. So John was copying the Bacchae, and then all the church fathers missed this. But then somehow Christians in the 4th century figured it out, but didn't write anything about it. But then gave us the Feast of the Epiphany on the same date, but they didn't say why they were copying. Erik, help me out. What am I missing here?
I'm just what is the point?
All right.
Neal, welcome in.
Help me out. What am I missing? Let's help him out with this.
First of all, welcome back to MythVision and Gnostic Informant. For those who don't know, go subscribe to Neal. He's my bro. We have a similar story. We have a similar interest. We have a similar passion and drive for truth. And of course, we need to help Michael Jones out. He's asking for help.
He said, what am I missing here? Help me out here. Well, number one, you're wrong about when they decided on January 6th.
Bingo.
He said it 3 times in that clip. This is way centuries later. He said post-Constantine. Then he said 4th century towards the end of the clip. Wrong.
Right.
Clement of Alexandria is the first person on any record at all to mention a date specific to the birth of Christ. Mm-hmm. And he also mentions that they celebrate the baptism too on the night prior in readings, which is January 5th. Who is he talking about, Clement of Alexandria? He's going back talking about Basilides, a Christian Gnostic who lived at the end of the 1st, early 2nd century.
He was teaching, just so
Prominent
people know,
teacher.
From 117 to 138 AD. And just to emphasize this point about what you're saying, to kind of vouch for myself here, I said this and quoted Clement in the video that he is reacting to, and only chose certain things to react to. Listen, I don't expect him to respond to everything I put, but the fact that he accuses me later of reading comprehension skills not being applicable to how I'm reading these ancient sources, which you and me are going to go over the most important ones that deal with this water into wine, is pretty interesting. He's not listening to his own Christian fathers.
Yeah, and January 6th came before December 25th, which is the 3rd century when they calculated that. January 6th is the first time they celebrated anything. And they still to this day celebrated by Armenian and Eastern Orthodox Church. However, Basilides,
I was just about to ask you
the central gospel to the Basilidians is John's gospel.
So this is important, right? John doesn't say, "Hi, I'm borrowing from Euripides Bacchae."
Oh, by the way,
and
what's the central thing about the Bacchae? Dan McClellan made this mistake too. They act like the Bacchae is the only text that exists for Dionysus.
Yeah.
Why would it, like, there is borrowing from the Bacchae going on, but the dates or whatever, or particular culture and cultic activity doesn't necessarily have to be from the Bacchae.
Right.
There's no parameters here. That's an arbitrary parameter.
No, that's like saying I need to copy Old English, and so I'm going to go to Shakespeare, but I can't apply modern contemporary cultic activities pertaining to Shakespearean stuff or Dionysian material, which is absurd because once you get into Orphism, the whole lid has blown off. And immortality and all of this stuff that plays into Dionysian.
Especially in Alexandria, Egypt, where Basilides was teaching, where the Serapis cult was mixing the Osiris with the Dionysian.
So much of syncretism is.
And this is well espoused by Diodorus of Sicily and Plutarch and Pliny. They all talk about the Dionysus Osirian mixing in the Serapis cult in Alexandria.
So just look, if we were in the court of law, and I said, "Your Honor, here's the deal." The defendant over here, who's the apologist, he is claiming this is 4th century. My good honor, if you will, whatever. I've never been in court having to deal with this kind of stuff as far as addressing the judge that way. But quote, the followers of Basilides celebrate the day of his baptism too, spending the previous night in reading
January 5th.
And they say that it was the 15th of the month of Tebe of the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, and some say that it was observed the 11th of the same month, Clement of Alexandria.
So that gives you the 6th and 11th.
6th and 11th.
By the way, the Theodosia festival that's mentioned by Pliny, who says
the elder.
It has on the notes. I know that goes from the 5th to the 11th.
Okay,
interesting.
This is very interesting, and people should consider that, especially when they literally explicitly say in Pliny there's a 7-day festival.
Right.
So this is an important point. Your Honor, I have a teacher named Basilides who in his canon, his sacred lore that he's teaching in his community is the Gospel of John. And he just so happens to have this wild, constant imitation. No one sings Xerox copy. This is the straw man he's doing. And we're going to get into this later. But no one's saying Xerox copy. He's imitating tragedy. He's showing the wine miracle of Dionysus, which was so ubiquitous. When you see a man dunking a ball in a certain way, you know it's Michael Jordan, the god of basketball. It's ubiquitous in the ancient world. I'm making that point before we move on to just say, Your Honor, you have this same Epiphany date celebration for Dionysus.
Right.
Early, not centuries later.
And then you have Epiphanius in the 4th century, where he claims this started at. Epiphanius in the 4th century, what does he say about January 6th? This date is observed by the idolaters, the pagans. He mentions the birth of Ion being born of a virgin on January 6th.
Yep.
He mentions the birth of Dusharas being born of a virgin named Kaba on January 6th. And then he mentions 3 cities where this tradition takes place. So this is a tradition, as you and I have already discovered in our research. This is a tradition that was going on among pagans.
Right.
Which January 6th is one of these days.
And you know me, Neal. I'm calling scholars like 18 times a day, different academics. John Kloppenborg, when I spoke to him about this very thing, and for those who don't know, he's a serious serious scholar.
Yeah.
Christ associations. He's big into all sorts
And
of
he points out in that book how the early Christ groups were doing the same kind of ritual activity, if you will,
Of
sort
the mysteries.
Of the mysteries. They're sort of following the norms of how you do your religions, which is normal. This is how culture works.
Right. But this is something we're going to have to emphasize later. That doesn't debunk Christianity, Derek or Neil.
We're not saying it does.
Exactly. So our conclusions, you might draw a different one, and that's fine. We have no problem with people being believers. Let's deal with evidence and facts and be honest with the material, then draw your faith conclusion. I was just saying, John Kloppenborg said, Gospel of John, he believes was written around the same time Basilides is on the scene teaching.
Yeah.
The same goes for Dennis MacDonald and several other academics. So let's go ahead and move
I can't believe you said that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's good to see you've changed your name to Dishonest Mythologist, as we all know that you are.
I am a dishonest mythologist. I do mythologics, which is the most dishonest apologetics out there.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We're terrible. We're the
and
worst.
I am just apologist in denial because there's so much evidence from before Christian texts that Dionysus turned water into wine, and I just am in denial about it. Don't you know? You see? Look how he's in denial.
You're obviously just really emotionally attached to your Christianity, and you're not knocked over by the sheer tons of evidence that's just totally against your view. And so there must be something wrong in your brain.
Yeah, so that's the psychoanalyzing is the only explanation that we get for this. So that must be what's going on here. So
yeah,
for those who don't know, back in March, I got invited to speak at a conference. And one of the topics they wanted me to cover was debunking like Jesus mythicism and pagan parallels. Well, Derek at MythVision saw that and he got really upset with one sentence. So he did a 2-hour response to that one sentence to show that I was wrong completely. And that one sentence is that I point out that we have no pre-Christian texts that mention Dionysus turning water into wine. And he claims he has found some. We're going to evaluate them.
right.
And so, yeah, that's what we're going to look at. We're going to go through this response. We're not going to play it all because a lot of it is him just sharing his testimony and his call to atheism and to reject Christianity, the evangelical style. But when I did go to Derek's video, I was a little disappointed and rather a little annoyed because the lecture is not linked anywhere, not a pinned comment. I'm like, dude,
bro.
Yeah. What? You don't want your audience to see what I was saying? Because there's a lot more context in that, which is important. It needs to be covered, which I will bring up some of the points I made here because, yeah, there's a lot of points to bring up with regards to that. Did you watch Derek's video yet or not?
I was thinking about it, and I think on purpose, I was like, I'm just going to live genuine react. By the time I had the time to do it, I was working and all this other stuff. So normally I am Mr. Prepare. This time I'm just gonna sit back and enjoy the show.
You actually did him a favor by not going through his whole video.
Yes.
And now you have the link in the description. So that was kind of just a mistake. Yeah. I didn't put your video in the description, but
yeah.
Now you really want us to go through your whole video? We will do that for you.
Well, I don't know about the whole
We have
aspects.
every aspect of his.
Every important point you bring up.
So I have 12 clips queued up.
We're going to get into
discussion about things he either completely gets wrong or borderline, I think, was dishonest about.
Right.
You give him the benefit of the doubt that he's just wrong. But there's parts in this video that you will see. I
don't know. I struggle between how do you know when someone is being deceitful or even lying between they're delusionally driven toward a conclusion and then
somewhere in the middle. I completely agree.
It's hard to know when he is and when he isn't.
I used to be like that.
I know what you're talking about because you have to defend the castle, okay? And you will do whatever's necessary. But here's the thing. That's psychoanalyzing. We got to deal with the facts, right?
Right.
Well, he brought a bunch there. There's a lot of fluff in there too. So while he's critiquing me for being fluffy in my video, he's being fluffy. And the well-known Brandolini's Law quote, the amount of energy needed to refute a lie is an order of magnitude bigger than to produce
it, right?
So if I make a claim right now, evolution is a lie, and you shouldn't believe it. Well, if I make that statement, okay, or I say evolution did not happen, there's only microevolution, how much work, how much material would you need to bring forward to produce transitional fossils, genetic DNA?
Exactly.
Like you have a lot of work. Well, I just wanted to show, even in this beginning of a series, I'm starting a series, Neal. This is going to go for a minute, and it's going to kind of tell my story along the way, which when you're editing these 2-hour videos that take us forever, you can't put everything in there in your journey. You can't put everything. It's too much editing. Long story short, I want to get through this and show just one statement, just like he did with this Basilides mistake, just like he does with a lot of stuff. Notice it took us, 5-7 minutes to explain and actually give you kind of context, understand how he's wrong.
The primary sources don't lie.
No, and you have to evaluate those. Yeah. And we're going to go with experts as well as our own common sense and eyes and reading skills when we look at it.
Yes.
So we're not only us two rogue, people.
Yeah, we're not just doing what he does, where I look for the scholars that agree with me and cite them and then go on with our day.
Yep.
We're actually going through the evidence and why we agree with these scholars and what the primary sources tell us. Yep. This is not this. We don't. This is just some game where we just look for scholars that agree with us and count how. I have 3 scholars. You only have 2. That's not how this is done.
Yeah.
This is about the evidence. It's about the arguments. Period.
That's it. And Erik Manning is there, kind of just to, I guess, echo and high five his broski. Yeah. That's ridiculous. How would you do that? Why would you draw that? That's so stupid. Like the whole video is pretty much making me look dumb. So let's get into your videos.
Let's do it.
Because you were the one who would like, Derek, I know.
I saw this video, by the way, on the screen right now I'm showing. This was 8 months ago. Somebody sent me, one of my friends sent me a link. I go, what is this? I click on it. It's Michael Jones in front of some sort of convention doing a speech that he prepared on mythicism. And I'm not a mythicist, and I've made videos against mythicism, but the level of fallacies in here, the straw man arguments that he was putting forth,
conflating people who, this is not in any way a serious scholarly take. So the fact that if you and me said, again, we're going to get into this, I'm sure, as we play it, but like all Bible believers are flat earthers and young earth creationists.
Right.
I know Michael would feel offended by that.
Right.
Why is it that zeitgeist versions of mythicism then equates, you can't find pagan parallels.
Exactly right.
You can't do any of this. Actual scholars do this.
Yeah.
It's a straw man.
And I'm showing on the screen where I actually made a comment and says, I cannot wait to refute this. This is so many problems. I never came around to it because I have bigger fish to fry than dealing with this. To me, this is kind of low-hanging fruit, to be honest. But you gave me the excuse to finally come around and do what I wanted to always do. So let's show the introduction and explain what's going on here.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, I am not, like, I literally am so busy doing things, I didn't add the link in the description, but I updated it after he made that video.
Right. And this one's in there now, for sure.
There is, you can go down there and watch
this
the
entire
whole
video, and
thing.
I actually encourage you to do it. And then come back and see how we examine it.
Yeah, and if you're nerds like us, go to the Egyptologist, go to the Assyriologist, go to those who know about Mithraism. Yeah. Okay, you're going to see that. Anyway, here we go.
So, have any of you ever heard that Jesus is not special? He's just like these other guys. He's just another pagan deity. They all rose from the dead. They all died. They were born of a virgin, that kind of stuff. How many of you have heard that before? Yeah. Well, it's all nonsense. And I'm going to show you why it is today.
All nonsense.
So let's get started here. Okay, so there are 2 types of mythicists. Okay, these are people who think Jesus didn't exist. He was just a copy of pagan deities. You can have the extreme mythicists. Jesus didn't exist. He was just a copy of pagan deities. You get a moderate mythicist. They'll say Jesus was just like other pagan deities, not a direct copy. They'll say, in the ancient world, every culture wanted a dying and rising God. This was just one for the Jews.
He introduces the straw man here. The rest of his entire speech is going to be about the extreme mythicist.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, he should have renamed this Against Zeitgeist.
Right.
Because this whole video is all quotes from Zeitgeist. Now, he does bring up a few things that Carrier points out and tries to refute Carrier in a couple points.
Of course.
But it's very dishonest because he never says, hey, this is from the Zeitgeist documentary and everybty agrees is wrong.
Or
except for people on the internet.
Academic
he doesn't tell you where he's getting this information from. He creates a straw man as if all mythicists are this extreme mythicist who believe everything that was in Zeitgeist or everything that you get from like really, Alexander Hislop's two Babylons, as if Carrier himself is like that.
Yeah.
He makes it seem that way because he doesn't differentiate. He doesn't differentiate between Carrier and this extreme mythicism. As you'll see in the video, the whole video is a straw man. Right. And like you pointed out, this is the same thing as if I went in front of an atheist convention or an agnostic convention and I started going, Christians, extreme Christians, here's what extreme Christians believe. Here's what moderate Christians believe. And then after I just give you some arbitrary two different levels of extreme Christians, and then I go on to talk about only the extreme flat earth Christians who go to the Bible and say there's 4 pillars that hold up a flat earth.
Yeah.
Oh, look, Christians believe in a flat earth. Christians believe the earth is 6,000 years old. Christians don't believe in evolution. Christians believe snakes can talk. Christians believe this, this, and this. And I say all Christians are doing this. That's what Michael Jones is doing in this video. It's very fallacious.
It is, and it's so problematic because when he does his response, as we echoed back into the other video, and we're going to continue to do so, he will replace mythicist with legend. So now he wants to put that 5th, prove Jesus didn't exist, to you have to prove Jesus is legendary. I don't need to prove anything. You're the one asserting it happened.
Throughout this entire video, you notice how he says all of this is nonsense. None of this is true.
Right.
What he does is he uses zeitgeist as the great straw man dummy that he can put out there and say, mythicists believe this. Right. All of this is not true. If he was a good scholar, he would have used this opportunity to point out the nuances and say, there are some sources that do say this is true, that do say X is true, that do say Y is true. This is why I don't believe it influences Christianity. See, that would have been an honest speech that he doesn't do. That's where we're going to take down this video.
I mean, it makes me even ask, what's he doing up on a stage?
Right.
Who is he? He's a defender of Christianity. He's not a PhD in this, and I'm not, right? But if you had me on stage, Neal, you know me, bro. You get on to me about this.
Yeah.
You don't have to always only have a scholar back that quote up. You know many scholars just go with what you're saying because you know scholars back you. You don't have to go and so and so and so and so and so and so. But if I did a presentation, I'll have 15 receipts on every damn thing I say, and I'm going to bring you the money. And I'm going to show you the money.
And if I'm going to refute something, I'm going to say the source that I heard it from.
Right.
I'm going to say, this is why Bart Ehrman is wrong. He said this. I'm not just going to say, Christians are just generally throw out a rant. That's literally what he's doing, is the definition textbook straw man argument.
Yeah.
He's creating a dummy, and now he's going to knock down that dummy.
First, they need to show correlations between Jesus and pagan gods. They need to show they are not just hasty generalizations. You just can't be like, Horus did miracles and Jesus did miracles, therefore they're the same. That's not how it works. They need to show that correlations predate Christianity. So sometimes they'll bring up Dionysus and they'll say Dionysus turned water into wine. Yeah, that comes from a 3rd century text. Postdates the New Testament. Shut up. Then they need to show a causal link between the New Testament and pagan literature. Okay, because correlation is not causation. You actually have to show that the things are not just similar, there's a causal link. So does the New Testament quote a pagan text to make a connection? And then they need to show Jesus didn't exist. Because even if they were successful in 1 through 4, it still would not get to 5. And I'll prove that to you at the end of this.
This is completely arbitrary nonsense. These 5 steps that mythicists need to do is complete nonsense.
Right.
We're talking about the culture, the cultural milieu, and cultures influencing other cultures, and cultures or responding to other cultures, polemicizing other cultures. That is how culture works.
Yeah.
There is no vacuum culture anywhere. So what he's doing is he's making this list of 5 things. He's setting up his own parameters and his own rules.
These are my rules, so my castle doesn't fall.
And the 5th one is especially fallacious because you can still have a real person in history being influenced by a mythology or vice versa.
Yeah.
As we see with the life of Augustus and Alexander the Great.
I think we're going to go through these 5 as this movie unravels, this video. We're going to go through these 5. But I do want you to point out, Neal brings an interesting point. He's actually highlighting the subjectiveness even of these 5. You must prove a causal relationship. What does it require to meet those criteria to be a causal relationship for you? Because if your causal relationship is, hi, I'm Luke. I'm a traveling companion of Paul. I'm quoting Homer's Odyssey, book 8, verse 23. Or I am quoting the prophet, this person. Like, if you need a direct quote, then your standard of causal expectation is going to be like more strong data that clearly gives you all the evidence you need so that you're not a dummy in the 21st century pretending you think you understand this material, which was never written to you, which we're going to get into. All of this is important.
Let me give you a prime example. George Lucas produced Star Wars in the 70s and 80s, and everyone commented on it knew how much it was drawing from the Dune novels. He never denies it. He never actually came out and
publicly said,
"Hi, I'm George Lucas, and I'm inspired and borrowing from Dune."
Right.
But he never denies it.
Is it a carbon copy?
It's basically well known, and it's not a carbon copy.
Of course it's
But let me give you some examples on just some of the parallels.
Okay.
You have Tatooine and Arrakis are these like sandy planets where the heroes live.
Mm-hmm.
The moisture farmers in Dune, and then the dew collectors in Star Wars. The sand crawlers in Dune and Star Wars are both called sand crawlers. You have the Sarlaccs and the sandworms that look very much alike. You have Spice and Dune and Star Wars.
So
is the
both?
trading. They both have that.
Okay.
Then you have the Empire and the Imperium, Princess Leia, Princess Alia. You have the Force. Luke has the Force.
Right.
What's his name? Has the voice.
Got it.
The voice and the Force. Duncan Idaho, Han Solo are very similar. People pointed that out. The Jedis and the Pranas, Bindu. The list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, I'm sure.
The point is, there's nowhere in Star Wars, so everyone can see the maybe genetic parallels or even just the cultural influences on. This is decades before. Dune was decades before Star Wars. But the major thing is you cannot find a scene in Star Wars that plagiarizes or copies word for word from Dune.
Right.
That doesn't exist. That's not how inspiration happens.
No, and that is something we're going to have to get into. And scholars who recognize this have noted it.
Now, he does mention Dionysus not turning water into wine until the 3rd century. You commented on this. He tried to correct himself and say, I was wrong about the date. But
No, he didn't correct the date. He didn't correct the date. So watch this.
Derek is in the chat. What up, Derek? You said shut up first, guys. Are you kidding me? That warrants calling all my followers sheep and that I'm ignorant and that we're just wanting this to be true. That's a little bit of a stretch, but okay. I'm sorry I said shut up. The audience laughed. I kind of meant it as tongue in cheek. I thought that's how it would be taken, not as shut up, idiots. It was so sorry. I didn't think a tongue-in-cheek comment to be taken like that. I don't think that warrants you calling all my followers sheep. But
it's supposed to be a sheep in Christianity.
Yeah, I don't know. I said no shut-ups, but yeah, it is. I think this is. I think it can be. It's okay to be spicy, and as long as you're not degrading and insulting somebody. And I don't think.
Listen,
has happened on our side.
I don't think Derek was doing it intentionally. I'm just saying, listen, I think these things you said did, and I said earlier, I don't think these things just came across the wrong way. If I came across the wrong way too, I apologize. As for the text I'm talking about, that's Achilles Tatius, the adventures of, what is it called? It's like Leucippe and Clitophon or something like that. I'm probably butchering the names, but I believe that's the text.
So what is he talking about? They said it's not a manuscript, but it's from that text.
Okay, so
that text isn't from the 3rd century.
So look, it's not from the 3rd century. Tim Whitmarsh, who's one of the world's greatest classicists right now, and by the way, I've got some stuff I'm looking forward to in his future works that is going to be amazing. I've been emailing him and stuff. He wrote a commentary exclusively on Achilles Tatius, book 1 and 2, and yes, it is Leucippe and Clitophon, or Clitophon.
Or in Greek, Leucippe,
right.
And Clitophon.
So you would bring that in. Yeah. Jones is wrong about just when this was even dated. So he's coming in, he's an authority. He runs in and goes, it's post-dates the New Testament. It's a 3rd century text that Dionysus turns water into wine. And then he goes, shut up. Everyone laughs. Now, I know Jones may not have understood his words, maybe, maybe not, as a mockery of you imbeciles, you idiots. How dare you do this? Again, conflating real scholarship that actually has recognized Dionysian tropes in imitation in John.
And John especially.
And not just John, Acts.
Yeah.
And potentially some have even gone further into other areas.
Yeah.
Yes. So he's mocking in a way. And then I make a video response calling that audience that laughed at him, while laughing with him really, at those people who are making the claims, sheep. Now, what do I mean by sheep? My sheep hear my voice and they follow me. That means, don't you doubt it? Don't you question it? You follow what the hell the Savior says, what the leader says.
It's kind of a fair criticism.
It's a fair criticism because
you're supposed to be a sheep.
But I say this in the video.
Yeah.
They are never going to fact check this.
Yeah.
They're never going to know anything beyond Jones's presentation. So here I am going to the primary sources like you, Neal, and I'm going to the academics like you, Neal, and saying, okay, hold on. What's the facts here? He's wrong. He's wrong about the date of the text. This text was written in 131 to 138 AD. At the same time, Basilides is on the scene.
And he's one of the great teachers in Alexandria.
Yeah.
Like he's right. He probably saw it being written.
For sure. I mean, who knows why not at least it's at this period, and John's gospel is being written around this period, according to the critical scholars.
And I can't prove that. I'm just guessing. I'm just saying.
There's a whole lot.
I don't want people to, don't quote me on that. Neal thinks Basilides was overseeing John. No, I'm just saying, if John's gospel was written in Alexandria, which most people think it was, based on the text in there, based on what was happening.
There's so much
based on what was happening in Alexandria, especially with Greek-speaking Jewish people living there, using the logos, for example, using Platonic ideas,
right?
And Dionysian, the new Dionysian ideas of the Bacchus, which is a philosopher, as Plato points out. A good philosopher, like Socrates, was a Bacchus. Someone that's willing to die for the truth.
Again, here you are in a period, right, where they're still admiring the canonical tragedies, the canonical Homeric epics.
And that doesn't necessarily have to be the orgy-loving, partying Dionysus. Dionysus morphs over time. You get the Ion cult. Who is Ion cult? Jarl Fossum, PhD, points out that the Ion cult was a syncretic deity of Osiris Dionysus who is resurrected annually. And it's a very much more modest, more stoic, and more pious version of Dionysus.
The same thing
that rises during the same time as Christianity,
right?
In the 2nd and 3rd, and then dies off in the 4th century.
The same thing happens with the Cynics with Heracles. If you go and read any of the adventures of Heracles, this is your man's man. Okay, this guy is bumping into every beautiful girl, and he is definitely having fun. And later on, the Cynics see him as the greatest model of a moral, ethical, philosophical teacher you can have, wearing a rough lion's fur in a club, and that's it. Going and living wherever he could survive.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. The Pythagoreans started this. There's a text from the Neo-Pythagoreans about Pythagoras called the Upsilon. It's an Upsilon. It looks like a letter Y in English.
Right.
And it's based on Hercules' decisions in life. If he chooses the righteous path, he has a life as a king, as an emperor, as a leader. If he chooses the easy path, where he has a lot of flatterers around him and chooses just to throw his life away, he has the hard path, where he's cast down into the pit. Mm-hmm. So it's called the Pythagorean Upsilon, and it's used. Hercules is the model for righteousness in this very tradition.
Well, you know who else
Hercules
is a soter? Dionysus, but we're going to get into this here. I want to read the quote of the section about Dionysus that comes from Achilles Tatius, so that we can both, and the viewer can actually hear it for the first time if they haven't ever heard it. Hardly has she ended when the time of dinner was again at hand. It happened at the season to be the festival of Dionysus. Here we are with that holy day, probably Theodosia, or who knows, some other celebration.
It's a good guess.
Lord of the vintage, for the Tyrians claim him as their own proper deity, singing on the subject of Cadmus's myth, which they relate as the origin of the festival, and this is it. So pause.
That's right next to the Galilee, first of all.
This is Phoenicia, right there in the Galilee, in the region where the stories of Jesus first spun.
Where Jesus grew up.
Got it.
Where you and I were in the Galilee when we were in Israel, and they have a nice Hellenized theater. They have Greek mosaics of Dionysus in
in Sepphoris,
which is one stone's throw away from
literally
from Nazareth.
Football field away from Nazareth.
You just walk there. It's the next mountain or next hill over.
Yeah.
Both two hills next. So we see Orpheus mosaics there. It's a very Hellenized, Greekified land of Israel.
Beautiful.
In the time of Jesus.
Yeah. I love that. And so, and Cadmus, of course, is the man who's from the east. He's from this region. They talk about Mount Nisa, and that's in other myths. But it's like you said, Scythopolis, Sepphoris, and of course, here is the myth, this Tyrian myth, which they relate as the origin of the festival. Okay. In early days, men had no wine, neither the dark, fragrant kind, nor that from Biblion vine, not Maron's Thracian sort, not the white Chian kind, not the island wine of Icarus, but all these, they said, were derived from Tyrian vines. They're flexing, like we're the other one, the original mother of all vines, being a plant of their country. There was a certain shepherd noted for his hospitality, just as the Athenians describe Icarus, from whom this Tyrian story derives its origin, so that it almost seems an Attic tale. They're Atticizing in the second sophistic. Dionysus once paid a visit to this herdsman, who set before him the produce of the earth and the result of the strength of his oxen, but their drink was the same as that of the oxen, since vines did not exist yet. Water is what the oxens drink, just like man. Mm-hmm. Man and oxen share the same drink. Dionysus thanked the herdsman for his kindly cheer and pledged him a friendly cup. Mm-hmm. But this drink was wine. The herdsman, drinking of it, danced for joy and said to the god, "Where did you get this purple water, my friend? Wherever did you find blood so sweet? For it is not that water which flows on the ground that, as it descends into the midriff, affords but a faint pleasure, while this delights the sense of smell before it ever reaches the mouth. When you touch it, it is cold, but it leaps down into the belly, and there, far down, lights up the fires of delight. This," said Dionysus, "is harvest water, the blood of the grape." Then the god led the herdsman to the vine and took hold of the clusters, squeezed them, and then pointing to the vine, "Here is your water," said he. "This is its source." That is the way in which wine came to men, as the Tyrian story goes, and they keep that day as Dionysus' festival. My father, wishing to celebrate it with splendor, had set out all that necessary for the dinner in a rich and costly fashion, but especially a precious cup to be used for libations to the god.
The point is, the fact that he doesn't criticize that this isn't exactly water turning into wine blows my mind, because you, in your video, pointed out, I think, 7 or 8.
There's a lot of them.
Primary, there's 8 total that I know of. I don't know if you pointed out all. You might have pointed
Probably
out
not all,
7
no.
or something. 2 of them are contemporary, early 2nd century. 5 of them are definitely before the Gospels, for sure. So that's Theopompus, Aristotle, Diodorus, Plutarch, and Seneca.
Yeah.
Okay, those 5 have either water from a fountain changing into wine and changing back into water, or empty basins that are used.
Oh, we're going to get into this.
Yeah. So the fact that when you pointed those sources out, he said, "I know those sources. I read it from an apologist website." So he didn't read the sources. He heard a secondary source tell him what to think, and it just ran with it. But the point is, the sources that you point out are more explicit on water turning into wine than the one that he admitted.
He confessed.
He's the one that says that one is water into wine. It's because it's later, so he doesn't care.
Yeah, he doesn't care, and it's like, I'll allow it, whatever.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. I actually challenge the mechanics, right? So Michael Jones, explain to me in this myth exactly where the precise mechanics of water is being transformed into wine. Where does it explicitly say water is being transformed into wine? Give me that in this source. Get into the Greek. I don't care. Good luck. Also, where is the substance and accidents being transformed in this narrative? How ridiculous is it that Jones implies this is the source for this transformation, likely due to certain academics who see similar language to John's gospel, or because his source for his information is an apologetic source, instead of doing the hard work and going into the commentaries, such as Tim Whitmarsh's, to see what the experts say about
Rudolph
this.
Boatman, who's written on this extensively.
Dude, there's so much. I want to highlight something here. Your point was really well put. So just to make that point, specifically you're addressing to Jones, this is not even as obvious as the earlier ones. Right? But even in the commentaries, when you read it, there are certain scholars who notice this is the blood of my covenant.
Sure.
Jesus uses similar type of phraseology. Here, Tim Whitmarsh says, well, it could be they both have a common Tyrian source.
Which I think is true.
That could be.
That's what I think is true.
It could be that one knows of the other,
Sure.
or vice versa.
Possible.
Some scholars draw the conclusion that this is a mockery of the Eucharist.
Sure.
And here's my question. If this is turning water into wine, and this is granting Michael Jones' position.
He's also wrong about the date, though.
But I know. Let's just skip the wrongness of Michael Jones here.
Next. Yeah.
This is so obvious. But let's just say.
But just so people know, this is a 2nd century text, not a 3rd century text.
Oh, no. 2nd century.
Yeah.
All right. We really don't even have to harp on that anymore.
I know.
He's wrong, and there's no way about
some
it.
say even early 2nd.
It is early 2nd.
Yeah.
No, 130s. 130s.
You're off by a century, man.
Easily. So this is an important point, though, that I want to drill. I need the viewer to really hear what I'm saying. Let's grant Jones that this was a water into wine miracle post-dating Christianity, potentially borrowing from Christianity.
Right.
Why would you have Dionysus transform, doing a wine miracle that he's already known to do for millennia before this, after Jesus, in the vein of a Jesus-y post-Jesus time?
Right. Well, what's more likely? He's doing what he already was doing before? And Jesus is borrowing? Or Dionysus had doing something different before, Jesus comes along, and then he morphs into that?
The point
it doesn't
is,
make sense.
This only clarifies our point even more.
It shows the closeness,
of the
cultures.
myths.
Yes.
And shows that Jesus is just working within this same
cultural
type of
milieu.
goalpost.
Yeah.
Yes. Same tradition. So notice the language in this. Purple water. Blood so sweet. Not the same water which flows from the ground, end quote. This, said Dionysus, is harvest water. The blood of the grape. Then the god led the herdsmen to the vine and took hold of the cluster, squeezed them, and then pointing to the vine, here is your water, he said. This is its source. Notice it's always water. That's exactly what the older sources are saying about the water and the vine and the blood water. Because we have a quote from Timotheus of Miletus, and I did not bring this in my documentary, 446 BC to 357 BC, wine is the blood of Dionysus. It says,
yeah, I saw this one.
Then he topped a cup made of ivy wood with the dark drops
of ambrosia. I used this source against Dan McClellan when Dan McClellan tried to tell somebody that blood and there's no sources about wine being the blood of Dionysus. So people just look at this and squint and think it's the same. But there you go, from the 5th century BCE.
This is 5th century.
Read it one more time.
Again, then he topped a cup made of ivy wood with the dark drops of ambrosia. That's a divine god's drink.
It's the nectar of the gods.
Nectar of the gods. Yeah. Froth raising, which he then poured into 20 measures of Bacchus'
It gives you immortality.
blood.
It gives you immortality, by the way.
Exactly.
Drink this and you will live forever.
That's why Jesus says that.
Right.
Drink and
it's the nectar of the gods. Read that source one more time.
Then he topped a cup made of ivy wood with the dark drops of ambrosia, for froth raising, which he then poured into 20 measures of Bacchus' blood. So this is clearly riffing into the same vein.
In a late first, early 2nd century Greek person living in these various cities, Philippi, Corinth, wherever, they would read this and go, whoa, this is
no connection.
Yeah, this is speaking to them. And this is, I think it was Tim Whitmarsh that pointed out to you that the Gospels are written for the Gentile world.
Oh, gosh.
They're not written for people who are speaking Hebrew in Israel.
Obviously.
They're meant to capture the hearts and minds of people in Dionysian cults. That's the whole point of it.
100%. Let me just give you what he says here. I was trying to do an interview on Achilles Tatius. He says, yeah, but it's a commentary on ancient Greek, original and hardly light reading, even for professional academics. Yeah, but I am finishing a new book on why Christianity landed so well in the classical world. That would be a better topic. Hopefully 2025. And this gets even better. There is also a new translation, he says, of Nonus' Dionysiaca, the longest poem from classical antiquity about the adventures of Dionysus. Anyway, I just had to flex on that. I
can't wait to see that. But as he points out, that the audience is meant, or the texts are meant for the audience of the Greek Greco-Roman people.
Without a doubt.
That's why you have the nectar of the gods, the blood of, drink my blood and live forever.
Eat my flesh.
And it's not just Dionysus. Prometheus' Echor gave people eternal life too. This is a common motif.
Common. None of them are Xerox copies. There is an absolute imitation.
Just like with Star Wars and just like with Star Wars and Dune. It's the same concept.
Michael Jones asserted that the earliest account of Dionysus turning water into wine happens to be a 3rd century text, which is after the New Testament.
Just making shit up.
Here's where he will be proven
He did
false.
make that up.
Proven. Not just
This is
not
the
just
proof.
shown.
This is the proof.
Proof,
You
ladies and gentlemen.
see?
But I'm truly curious to know what kind of magical illusion he will perform to get out of this one. First thing we need to recognize.
Oh, I have 2 magic tricks up my sleeves.
Yes, he does.
First is called reading comprehension skills, and the other is philosophical methodology.
That's
You
called
just
sophistry.
Sophistry.
Is that Athenaeus, writing between 170 and 230 AD, is literally quoting works from the centuries before Jesus, well into the 3rd, 4th, even 5th centuries BC. But guess what? We don't even need to use a 3rd century source. Of course, texts from the 3rd century AD have Dionysus doing wine miracles.
Yep.
Because the tradition of this god performing miraculous wonders with wine and nature stretched back into classical Greece and even into the deeper past.
Okay, let's just get to the text here. Let's get to the first one. It's just before this point here. All right. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. I'm about to be proven wrong. Dionysus turned water into wine in pre-Christian text. Let's see what he's got.
This isn't all nonsense, and no, we don't need to shut up. Eudoxus says that persons who drink the water of Lake Clitorius taste a distaste for wine, and Theopompus asserts that the waters of the springs already named are productive of inebriety. According to Mucianus, there is a fountain at Andros, that water fountain, consecrated to Father Liber, Dionysus, from which wine flows during the 7 days appointed for the yearly festival of that god.
Look at his face right
The
now.
taste
Oh my
of
God.
which becomes
He's
like
French.
that of water the moment it is taken out of the sight of the temple.
Oh, for crying out loud, you got to be kidding me.
You have been debunked.
Hold on, Eric. Let's let the audience, because we don't want them to be sheep. We're just telling them what to think. Guys, type in the chat. Do you see the problem that Eric and I are seeing here? Okay, so type the problem.
It's not the same.
You
It's
see it?
not exactly
Okay,
the same.
we were promised pre-Christian texts of Dionysus turning water into wine. So if you see the issue, go ahead and say what it is. That's not water into wine. Thank you, Nathan.
Hey, Nathan, it literally is water turning into literal wine, Nathan.
I brought the sources back for us to look at together, but I also have a surprise that you and I are going to show everyone, so stay tuned. Let's go to Pliny the Elder together. Again, I don't want to prime anyone. You can draw your own conclusion. How analytically specific, how atomic do you want to get into the language to try and sift through and come out with a different conclusion?
By the way, when he said my magic trick is reading comprehension and philosophical
that was a
argumentation,
slap me in the face.
well, it's basically saying I could just be a sophist and just think of some philosophical argument to get around you.
Well, that's
how I
what
interpret
take
that.
it. Yeah,
Well,
I
that's
take
what
it.
he does, though.
That's exactly what not only him, but apologists in
That's what
general
they do.
who go into philosophy. I find this, and that's what gives me that Lucian kind of tinge in thinking, dude, these guys want to believe in tall tales and hope for afterlife and all that kind of stuff. Do I wish there was an afterlife? Of course. But
By the
let's
way,
get
his
off-
reading comprehension is not there. Let's go.
Persons who drink the water of Lake Clitorius take a distaste for wine, meaning when they drink this, it makes them not want to drink wine. This water makes them not like wine, okay? And Theopompus, which is in that 3rd century source, we lost his original
4th
material.
century source.
I thought it was 3rd, Athenaeus.
Oh, no. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm saying Theopompus is 4th century
Yeah,
BC.
BC. Yeah, I'm just making the point that a 3rd
Yeah, yeah.
century.
It's a fragment. Most of our
we're
texts are
just being
fragments.
technically correct. So he asserts that the waters of the springs already named are productive of inebriety, that people who drink those waters get drunk. They cause them to be intoxicated. Okay.
And before anyone says anything about this being a fragment that we found in a later source, it's the same exact story that Aristotle tells us.
Bingo.
So there's the idea that they changed it later to copy Christians. You're out of your damn mind. Because Michael Jones would try something like that.
He does a lot of this kind of
stuff. He would go, Theopompus, we lost the original. How do you know they didn't change it to copy Christians?
Right.
He does this with the Zendavesta, because the Zendavesta is all rolling text. First of all, he never mentions the Gathas, which is the original scripture of the Zoroastrians.
Right.
People ask about Zoroastrianism. He does this fallacious argument that the Zendavesta came way later, but it's a rolling text. That would be like me saying, because the Codex Vaticanus, the Codex Alexandricus, and the Codex Sinaiticus are 4th and 5th century. That means we should say the New Testament's 4th and 5th century.
Right.
That's the same logic. But that's why I wanted to make sure that if anyone tries to get smart about fragments that show up in later sources, you're just wrong, and nobody's saying what you're trying to say.
Right. No classicist.
And we have Aristotle anyway.
Right.
We have Aristotle anyway.
So he says, according to Musanius, for those who don't know, he is a 3-time consul, but that'll get brought up here. There is a fountain at Andros, consecrated to Father Liber, Dionysus, from which wine flows during the 7 days appointed for the yearly festival of that god. So here's at the fountain at Andros, there's a water fountain, a natural fountain. They didn't have modern machinery fountains like we do. This is a natural from the earth. Water flows from a fountain at Andros.
Literally water.
Literally water.
There's nothing else you can say. You can't say it's honey. You can't say it's nothing.
It's water.
You can't say it's air. It's
for
water
7 days,
that changes into wine.
Right.
There's no philosophical argument that you can make to change
no ancient would have ever done his Aristotelian nonsense.
Unless you took the wine, unless you started like some sort of flow of wine somehow,
right?
And the water, there's a different water flow, and there's a different water, and then you somehow took the water and put it away, and then changed it with the wine. That's the only way you can get out of this.
So I want to finish this source just for the viewers to keep. So we're on the same page. I just had to emphasize it flows water 365 minus 7 days, right?
Yeah.
7 days during the yearly festival of that god, where his presence is,
which is this January 5th.
This is the point.
Which is on the night of January 5th.
January 5th. The very night that Basilides...
the night of, the same night that Basilides starts doing readings of the baptism of Christ.
Right.
And celebrates the birth on the next day, January 6th. The same thing they're doing here.
Same thing.
So we already have more than a causal link here.
We have very clear, and Bultmann actually echoed the same exact thing. Okay. So he says, that God's presence there for 7 days, wine flows. So water, now you have wine flow. For
anyone who doesn't know, the wedding at Cana, and we pointed this out, is commemorated on January 6th in the earliest sources in Eastern Orthodox Church. The wedding at Cana is a wine miracle.
Yes.
And here we have a wine miracle for Dionysus on his Epiphany date. The same day.
Got it. So it says that the taste of that wine becomes like that of water the moment it is taken out of the site of the temple. Okay? What Jones does, and we're going to notice that you'll see this later when he tries to go, he just needs some philosophy help. Let me bring up Aristotelian philosophy.
That was jargon. That was sophistry jargon. Go ahead.
There's so much to say when that comes up, but I just want to make the point. If you have water flowing out of your fountain, then 7 days, the god is apparently visiting you in the temple, and then now there's wine for 7 days. And if you get away from that god, which is in the temple,
that's the part he never brought up. He never mentioned.
Emphasize it.
He doesn't emphasize that you mention that the people take the wine away, and when it's away from where the miracle, when they go away from the miracle, all of a sudden the wine turns back into water again.
Well, that's what I think's happening, right? And the other scholars think the same thing.
Yeah.
My point is why does wine start tasting like water when you get away from?
Because it's turning back into water.
Right. That's common sense.
That's the plain reading of the text.
That's the plain obvious conclusion. You don't have stuff tasting like water because the point is the God himself is the essence of that ambrosia.
It's his epiphany.
It's his epiphany, his presence, his wine. So when you leave his presence, you're not going to have that sweet tasting blood of Bacchus. Exactly. It's going to change into water, like the myth of the Tyrian in Achilles Tatius. Right. It's not the same. It's
at his temple too, so that's why it's his presence.
So the other one that Pliny says is it's accredited by Musanius, who was 3 times consul, and this verifies the Theodosia date. Yeah. That it says on the nones of Janus, that is January 5th, The night
The
of
night
January
of January 5th. By the way, for anyone who doesn't know, the nones is a lunar thing. So when you see the nones, the nones means, so in Roman calendars, you had the nones, you had the ides, and you have the calends.
Right.
Three marks of the calendar. The nones is the first week when the crescent moon is right in the middle between half of a moon and a new moon.
Right.
So when you see that nones in the sky, it's nighttime. So it's before midnight of January 6th when you start this.
Well, what does Clement say? He says they stayed up all night reading scripture on January the 5th.
And celebrating his
the birth
baptism
and
too.
the baptism. The
Yeah.
birth of Christ and baptism.
Yeah.
So we get this. Pliny is writing this, clearly not influenced by Gospels. Gospels are influenced by him.
Well,
if anything.
he died in 79 AD.
But I don't even think...
John was not written then.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just making the point. There's no influence.
Yeah.
And you might even argue there's neither influence either direction because they have common
Roots.
Right.
Yeah.
So Plutarch, writing in 46 to 120, writes, "But those of the Thebans who had remained outside, taking the city on their left, advanced upon the rear of their enemy at the spring called Sisusa." Pay attention. This is very, very important. Here, there's a spring, meaning a natural flowing source of water that is always flowing with water, right? It says, here as the story goes, his nurses, the nymphs, bathed the infant Dionysus, birth. This is a birth narrative.
and a baptism.
Birth and a baptism right here.
Right there, just the same as the Cillidians are doing.
They bathe him after his birth. Dionysus is bathed, for the water has the color and sparkle of wine, is clear and very pleasant to the taste.
Right.
Now, I don't know about you, bro. I drink water. We got water right here, okay? If all of a sudden we were saying the God is present, and I started going, oh my gosh, notice it's turning purple. It says color. It's sparkling like wine does, and it has a pleasant taste.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come along and go, the accents on that change, the accidents, but the substance is still water. I'm going to look at you and go, you idiot.
You're assuming that the ancients thought this
They
way,
weren't
or that
thinking
the
this.
gospel writers would have factored that in their right. It does not matter.
absurd.
That is sophistry. What you're doing,
Yes.
It's a definition textbook sophistry. Trying to get out of this somehow. Trying to think of the best argument you could think
Any
of
wiggle-
to get myself out of this.
I was a prophet, was I not, Neal? I predicted he would do a magic
It's
trick.
total magic trick. You got him, dude. Anybody with a normal IQ would notice that you're right here.
I knew this was coming, and you might find something that you might go, well, I don't draw that exact conclusion. That doesn't matter, because the whole point is not about did the water itself molecularly or substancy or accidents and all that transform into wine. The point is, this God is transformative, and it's not just wine, milk, honey, water, wine. He is the God of life and abundance. That is the point. And when he is there in the presence, life comes. A dead wooden boat transforms into a living garden, vineyard of life, flowing with clusters and wine. This is ancient.
Right.
If you don't see the obvious in front of you, I'm never going to convince Michael Jones. I'm never going to convince Erik Manning. There's too much ego involved. There's too much stuff here. But I'm doing this not for them.
Yeah.
I'm doing it for the person who's an
Person
honest
watching.
truth seeker,
Watching
who's
this.
going to
Yeah.
look at this and go, dude, are you saying that Dionysus came and dug a trench and put a hydraulic pump of freaking wine
in there? That's the only way to get out of this.
He literally later goes, all right, it's like turning on your faucet, water's running, and then all of a sudden, like you almost hook up a different tube, I imagine, and then there's wine coming, so the water's not the wine now.
That's the only way you can argue at this, and
How
that's not
stupid
in
is
the
that?
text.
That's not.
Plain reading of the text. He does this, but remember with Inanna, it's coming up.
Yes.
He doesn't read the text plainly as it is. He thinks of some way to get out of the text.
Right.
But before we even move on, though,
Yes.
we have to talk about the basins, because
It's in the next section.
Okay.
And by the way, I have one more that you loved more than anything. And it mentions a virgin, and it mentions an ascension of Ariadne.
the Seneca one.
Man, I can't read the whole thing because it's too long. And
We'll just hit the main parts.
The main part, honestly, Neal, is this.
It
Okay.
doesn't matter about the virgin. That's not a big part.
No, it's not. It's really this. Bacchus in the presence of his stepmother Naxos.
By the way, Bacchus with his mother at a wedding.
At a wedding, okay.
So we already have some sort of similar setting as what happens in the wedding at Cana. Go ahead.
I forgot to even add this, right? This is Seneca.
Yeah.
Seneca's writing in
In the
40
40s.
to 65
Yeah.
CE, before the Gospels, okay? this talks about a sacrifice that happens. Then, of course, Bacchus, honored Bacchus in the presence of his stepmother Naxos, adorned by the Aegean Sea, gave the abandoned virgin to the marriage bed, compensating the loss with a better husband. The Nyctilian stream flowed.
Right.
Catch this. From the dry pumice stone, chattering streams cut through the grass, and the high ground drank the sweet juices.
Right.
So the river
you have water turning into wine at a wedding where Bacchus is with his mother.
It's not just water, it's a stream.
Yeah. But I'm just pointing out,
Yeah.
you have a very similar situation to the wedding at Cana, and it's clearly drawing from the tradition
Yes.
that Pliny, that Diodorus, that Plutarch, that Theopompus, that Aristotle are drawing from, and Pausanias later
They're
too.
all like,
It's a similar tradition, and this is the tradition that Epiphanius is talking
Yep.
about, in my opinion.
yeah, Pseudo-Apollodorus and Ovid bring up how there's like gift-giving powers that Dionysus gave to
That's
the
why it's called
daughters.
Theodosia.
Man, there's so
It's
much.
on January 5th.
That's not turning water into wine. And here, I have an idea here. I actually made a slide here because I thought this would be helpful to sort of explain the issue here. So when we dive into this stuff, this is where philosophy is going to be helpful.
Oh my God, I can't stand. Can you just pause it for 1 second? I don't want to cut you off in the middle of this, but it's so cringe when somebody who thinks their intelligence is bigger than it is tries to pull a sleight of hand and throw in some philosophical jargon like Jordan Peterson
Yeah.
style. This is like one of the most cringiest examples of this I've ever seen. Go ahead.
In Aristotelian logic, or Aristotelian categories, excuse me, there are two things: substances and accidents. Okay. A substance refers to the core, so the independent entity itself, like the person or the dog. Okay. Okay. Accidents are like properties or characteristics that can change without altering the fundamental nature of the substance. That's important. So in the case of a dog, okay, it's fundamentally a dog, and then accidents can change, like the fur, the size, the color, the length of the nose, perhaps, that kind of stuff. You get the deal? This is actually important in transubstantiation. So when we say the bread and wine becomes the body and blood of Jesus, the substance changes. It becomes the body and blood of Jesus, but for our benefit, none of the accidents change. So it still retains the accidents of bread and wine because no one wants to experience flesh and blood in their mouth. It would be gross. So this relates to transubstantiation. When Jesus turned water into wine, he changed the substance and the accidents. In these examples, we have no substance change. We have water that has an accident of wine. We have wine that has an accident of water. And there's a fountain, and sometimes during the year, it shoots out wine. Okay, that's a substance replacement. That doesn't say that they scooped up water, and then lo and behold, Dionysus did something, and that water in the cup changed to wine. You have a fountain that just replaces. It starts shooting out wine. That's not the same, ladies and gentlemen. That's the problem there.
Even if we grant that this philosophical categories thing is legit, and we can apply it to the Gospels, as he points out, that the bread and wine, the substance changes, not just an accident, right? The same thing applies to Pliny, to Seneca, to Diodorus, to all the fountain sources. The water is no longer water. There is no, it doesn't get changed by adding wine to the stream. The water changes into wine. Literally, what you just did there, trying to make your audience think you pulled some slick philosophical trick, is jargon and nonsense. And it doesn't even apply. It doesn't even apply. You're still wrong. Even if we apply this to your sources, you still have a substance of water changing to the substance of wine. So I don't know why he thought this was smart. Maybe some dumb people that watch him think this made sense, but it made zero sense from anybody with an IQ over 50.
I want people to think about what he just said about accidents and about substance. Substance is the being, the thing, the dog, the human, or whatever. Well, the thing, bread and wine, literally turns into Jesus, a human, a flesh human with blood. He literally says in this clip that thank God the accidents didn't change. So we aren't like Jeffrey Dahmer having to actually taste the human that we're eating and drinking their blood from.
Right.
I don't know if he realizes this, how insane they sound
Right. But
on this whole issue.
what I don't understand is why he's bringing this up against you, pointing out that water turns into wine in 5 different primary sources. What does that have to do with that? Because
it's a magic trick. He's trying to pull.
But it's such a non sequitur.
Right.
He's literally talking about a different topic now.
Right.
Because there is no accidents happening. There is no accident category happening in the water versus wine Pliny miracle. It's literally water. I keep saying literally. It cringes when I hear people opposite, but I can't have to stress. It's
insane.
Literal water that turns into literal wine.
Here's the you
There's
know what he's
no
trying to
other
do?
way around it.
Neal,
And this little sleight of hand thing here by talking about the Eucharist is complete non sequitur.
It is non sequitur.
It doesn't have anything to do with this.
100%, bro. And what's absurd about this too, even if you granted, let's just pretend that, okay, the water turned off, but on came the wine, and then later on the wine turned off. It's not in the plain reading of the text. It's obvious any ancient reader would have known this, and the people, they literally echo this, and it's not just the ancient reader, the classicists who know this material agree.
Right. They all say this.
But if we granted it, he's missing the point. It's not
exactly.
It has nothing to do with, did the water stop and the wine stop?
It's missing the point.
He's missing the point. Like the ground produces wine.
But this is the game that he will try to play to sort of distance himself from any influence.
And it also distracts people like you and me from nailing that evidence on people like him. He could dodge it and trick his audience who want him to be right. This is my point.
That's what he has. He has that advantage over us.
That's it. Well, of course, because they're his audience. Right. And that's why I used the comment sheep, because I'd rather they're his sheep or his followers. And you might call my audience sheep. I'm saying, look at the primary sources. Don't agree with me. Do not. I don't have any, like, if you don't believe this, you're going to burn in hell if you don't follow MythVision to the T. I'm not a cult freaking leader. I'm not interested in, like, keeping our little tower built. You can be a Christian at the end of the day and still believe the things that we're talking about with this material. Right. So it's just really nuts. And you know what this reminded me of, though, him bringing this up? Something that he probably has very little knowledge to no knowledge on, omophagia. The practice of tearing and ripping the animal apart. Why did they do that, Neal?
In honor of the tearing of Dionysus.
What was that about? Because they may not.
It was a resurrection festival of Dionysus, who was torn apart by the Titans. So they would ritually eat flesh of raw animals in honor of Dionysus
and to unite with him.
Yes.
So that the same way he's reborn and brought back from the dead through the chewing as an infant Dionysus by the Titans, you yourself become one in union with Dionysus and will receive that blessed afterlife.
Yeah.
This is all Eleusinian.
It's an Eleusinian, yep.
I mean, come on. Like, and I don't know how much he knows about that, but it's worth doing. Take the examples by Pliny or Plutarch. When one takes the wine away from the side of the temple again, the taste becomes like that of water. You mean to tell me it only tastes like water but isn't water? How do you know, Jones? How do you know it isn't water? How do you know that?
It's not in the plain reading of the text. I keep going back to that. If you just read the text plainly and then you go, what does it say? It doesn't matter what you want it to say or how you want to change the text or throw some philosophical jargon in to make it think that it's something different. It doesn't matter.
Right.
The plain reading of the text is very simple, period.
It's obvious. Yeah, so how do you know it isn't water? How like does the source give you explicit detail that it hasn't switched back to the original substance it was before the 7-day festival where the epiphany of the god takes place? Blah, 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 blah. The point is, no Dionysus, no wine. Yes, Dionysus, yes, wine. No Jesus, no wine miracle. Yes, Jesus, yes, wine miracle. The God is there showing his glory, his epiphany. I wrote to a classicist, a Greek classicist and philologist, expert on Dionysus, Ana Isabel Jimenez San Cristobal. I try to pronounce this properly. She's from Spain. She writes, quote,
I cite her all the time in my videos.
You introduced me to her, even though we were both connected to Paula.
She's friends with Paula.
Yeah. You introduced me.
These are like cutting edge anthropologists and classicists of the world. And America's very far behind in some of these categories, especially with rethinking about James Frazier.
Yep.
And how they're starting to polemicize Jonathan Z. Smith now.
Or at least
if you're still citing the 60s articles by Jonathan Z. Smith, you might have to rethink that. You might be outdated now.
Yeah, they're not.
It's no longer Frazier. It might be Smith is the one getting outdated now, according to these scholars.
Right. They're saying let's go back to the source, but that's another video we're going to have to do.
Let's go.
This is a great point that you're bringing up. Quote, in most of the examples and this is the conclusion of an upcoming article where she's actually documenting all these Dionysus miracles, these fabulous wine events that take place. In most of the examples, the miracle is situated in the natural realm, the real world, and consists of wine coming out of springs and rivers when it would be expected that water would flow forth. At other times, it is said that the water from these springs tastes like wine. In Ellis, the miracle occurs inside containers, and it is significant that the miracle is fulfilled in bronze cauldrons, she puts the Greek up, traditionally used to contain water, used for washing and purifying oneself before a meal. Although the transformation of water into wine is not explicitly stated in some examples, it is clear that what is expected to rise from the ground, flow from the fountains, and flow down the rivers is not water, but wine, milk, or honey, thus in bacchantes. For the miraculous action to be effective, divine intervention is a conditio sine qua non. In myth, the god himself is the protagonist and causes the miracle, as in the episode of the pirates narrated in the 7th Homeric hymn, or in the sudden appearance of wine, milk, and honey in the Bacchae of Euripides. In ritual, prodigies usually coincide with Dionysian festivals that celebrate the arrival or epiphany of Dionysus, who is traditionally considered the god who comes periodically. In Teos, Elis, and perhaps Naxos, the prodigy took place during celebrations comparable to the Athenian Anthesteria. While in Andros and Hilarto, the festival seems to be the Theodosius, which we've been talking about January 5th. Both are essentially festivals in which wine and its generous consumption are the central element. This image of the abundance of wine in the drinking contest that sometimes took place at festivals may have given rise to prodigious stories about wine as a kind of torrent of drink that flowed during the celebration. In any case, this abundant wine is felt as a demonstration of power of the god who, as we've seen, is perceived as a wonder maker with wine. So we, like all that to be said, she agrees with us that anyone reading this would have known, like, this is definitely that. So
not only that, there's I think there's 5 sources where it's a fountain that turns water into wine, but there's a few other ones where it's not a fountain, it's basins.
Yeah.
And it says empty bronze vessels. This is the one I want to get into, because you and I thought, that's not water turning into wine. We both discussed this, how you got basins here, because in the John's gospel, it's water with basins.
Yes, they're in the basins.
And then a scholar pointed out to us that those basins are actually connected.
Yes.
I go, Those bronze basins, they're called lethane.
Yeah, I thought it was lebes or something, but it might be lebes.
Lethane, I think it's called. I'm showing it on the screen right now. That's the word that they use in Pliny, or not in Pliny, in the source that we get from
right here. We've got Theopompus, Aristotle,
those early ones. Yep. So they use that word, which is describing a specific bronze vessel that's used for what?
For water. So this is from one of the top Dionysus scholars says.
Yeah.
So it says, these bronze cauldrons traditionally used to contain water, and they were used for washing and purifying oneself before a meal.
That's the big part.
They're made.
These specific vessels are used for purification rituals. Now, what does John's gospel say?
Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. And Jesus tells them to fill the water pots with water. Now remember, they were already empty before he told them to fill them up with water. So you have 6 empty water pots that Jesus then says fill up with water pots. So that's the difference in this.
What verse?
Story.
What verse is this?
Verse 6, chapter 2. So it says 6 water pots of stone, not bronze. Now, why would Jews not use bronze, Neal?
Because that's not their. They use the stone.
They use. So
this is a Judaized version of that ritual purification jug.
Bingo.
So they don't use. It's not the exact. The Greeks use the bronze basins for this in their Eleusinian mysteries and other mysteries. The Jews use the stone ones.
Even Herod
but they
did that.
both. But the point is this. In both texts, they are using a
A
basin that is dedicated for ritual purification.
Bingo.
So you have 7 primary sources, 8 if you count Pausanias, but that's after, it's fine.
It's still
7 to 8 primary sources that either have a fountain of water that transforms into wine, literally, there's no other explanation, or empty basins that are made for purification rituals that are supposed to have water in them turn into wine. The John's gospel seems to unify those things, where you get the basins that are made for ritual purification with water in it turning into wine on the same day as the Theodosia.
So you have
there's more than enough causal links there.
I mean, like, come on, guys. Like, where do you draw the line? So this is a very powerful point you're hitting, Neal.
Yeah.
You have 3, but Jesus has 6.
Jesus is better.
Double. And guess what?
I
think you and me are in the same boat and agreeing. We think John's gospel is literally making Jesus a greater than Dionysus.
And it's unifying the traditions into one tradition and Judaizing it and sort of changing it.
For sure.
Making it, doubling the amount of jars, making it better.
For sure.
Absolutely.
I think the major difference, and the whole idea of one's stone, one's bronze is silly to me because they're both purifying.
But this is what you would see in Star Wars.
Right.
You would see Luke Skywalker doing greater things than the Arrakis figure.
Right.
So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's silly. So like 6 pots, 3 pots. Now let's read a few of these examples just so people know like what the myth is in Dionysus. And you have the myth here in the gospel, right? So, and I'm calling it a myth, yes. Theopompus the Chian, and this is 320 to 380 BCE, says that the vine is found at Olympia near the Alpheus, and that there is a place about 8 furlongs from Elis where the natives at the time of the Dionysian Games close up 3 empty brazen vessels, bronze vessels, and seal them in the presence of all the people round about. And at a subsequent time, the next day usually, they open them and find them full of wine. The same is said of Aristotle, except it goes a little longer. And it even goes further to add that, like, the meat in the city,
but it's pretty much the same exact story.
But the birds even know. It says that the birds, they know that meat that is to the god won't come and pick it's fun stuff. Yeah. Pausanias, I actually want to just contend the idea.
The reason why Pausanias is interesting is because 4 centuries later, the same tradition is still being written about by Pausanias.
But it's not just a
contemporary with the Gospels.
It's literally still a celebration then.
Yes.
But
that proves that this couldn't have been some old thing that the Christians had no access to.
That's why I think he's so important.
So he gives the same story, basically. You don't have to read it again.
No, and I'm not. I just mentioned that it's the exact same thing. 3 vessels, 6. Bronze, we have stone, right?
Water into wine.
Right. Empty vessel.
January 5th, January 6th.
It's like, come on.
Let's talk about this deity. This is a goddess called Inanna. There's a text about her called The Descent of Inanna. In the text, she descends to the underworld. It says she's stripped, she's crucified. They say she was dead for 3 days and 3 nights, and then she resurrected. Sounds like Jesus. The text is available online. Anyone can go and read it. It's very easy to find. Inanna's Descent. Translation. In the text, here's what we see. She descends to the underworld. Okay? When she gets there, she's stripped of 1 piece of clothing at 7 different gates. Okay? So she eventually is naked. Tries to seize the throne of the underworld. She tries to take the throne for herself. But the gods of the underworld are so powerful, they just pronounce her dead, and she's dead. Then after she's dead, her dead body is hung on a hook. That's not crucifixion. Then, after a little while, she's brought back to life. Now, anyone notice I'm missing the concept of 3 days and 3 nights? Not in there. It's in the text.
Oh, it is in there.
But where is it?
Oh, so it's not in there, but it's in there.
So she says, this is Inanna speaking to her servant. Early in the text, she says, on this day I will descend to the underworld. When I've arrived, Ninkaburu, arrived in the underworld, that is, make a lament for me. Okay? Beat the drum for me in the sanctuary. Make the rounds of the houses of the gods. So when Inanna gets to the underworld, Ninkaburu is supposed to start lamenting for her. Then we read, in between these 2 texts, we read that Inanna descends and dies. So, then we read, after 3 days and 3 nights had passed, her minister, Ninkaburu. She made a lament for her in the ruined house. She beat the drum. She made the rounds of the houses of the gods for her. What mythicists have done is they've misunderstood the text. It doesn't say she was dead for 3 days and 3 nights. It says that her descent to the underworld took 3 days and 3 nights. They've assumed the 3 days and 3 nights corresponded to her death, not her descent. So Inanna is not dead for 3 days and 3 nights. They misread the text. It corresponds to her descending because it's an instruction for her servant.
That was he's either really not smart, has bad reading comprehension, or is very dishonest. And I think it's the latter. Because what he just did there, first he tries to say, you guys heard there was 3 days and 3 nights? It's not in there. But it's in the text. That already right there is sort of a sleight of hand.
That's a hey, I'm priming my audience.
You're saying it's not in there, but it is in there.
Yeah, why is he saying that?
Well, that didn't make any sense.
Why do you think, psychoanalyze him just a second, why do you think he doesn't want
It's sort of a way to shake up, like you heard this was in there. It's not really what you think.
My Christian audience, don't get worked up over this.
So then he continues, and when I first thought, I go, let me see how he's going to argue this. There's no way you can argue this not in the text. It's in the text. Stanley Noah Kramer is the standard translation. There's other translations that also say the same thing. The standard reading of the text talks about the thing that he wrote on the screen is in there. It's early on in the text.
Yeah.
Then there's about 10 verses that he doesn't show on the screen. Right. And then it says, Inanna was like a corpse. Her corpse was hung on a hook. Immediately after that, the next thing that it says, there's no text in between. The very next text says, after 3 days and 3 nights. And then there's some stuff that happens. The plain reading, once again, we're going back to the plain reading of the text again. The plain reading of the text is that Inanna was dead, was a corpse on a hook, and then immediately it says after 3 days and 3 nights. Yep. And then there's a process of Enki taking the water of life and having it sprinkled on it. The point is the only indication of time passing in this entire myth is 3 days and 3 nights. Yep. There is no indication that it's any longer than that. What he did there was put text on the screen to make it seem like the text says this, and then it says this. But he leaves out what the original text says, and I think he did it on purpose.
So this actually gets juicy, because I reach out to Joshua Bowen. Look, Jones said I was afraid of showing my audience his original video being funny probably, but either way, I wasn't. So I was like, all right, you brought me into this. You're like, check this out. Look at what he's saying about Inanna. So I just so happen to know an Assyriologist who's a serious one, who knows how to research this stuff. Hey, Josh, check it out, man. I got this problem. Michael Jones, can you see this clip right here, what Michael Jones is saying? What are your thoughts about this? Because this isn't how it looks in Samuel Noel Kramer's interpretation, his translation. And then Joshua Bowen wrote me a letter. But not only wrote me a letter, he said, I already talked to Jones about this, so I don't know why he drew that conclusion.
So let me get this straight. And Jones was shopping around for a Assyriologist, trying to get the right answer that he liked. Yep. If he didn't get the answer he liked, he ignored it and went right to the apologist.
Well, he literally told Joshua Bowen that he was actually using the work George Landez, who wrote in 1967, and the article,
the one that he agrees with.
He agrees with it, right? It's a 3 or 4 page article. I read it today. The 3 days and 3 nights motif in Jonah 2:1, which is definitely in Greek a katabasis. This is a chthonic underworld descent.
That's the point. The 3-day motif is from that.
Right. This article tries to go bend over backwards to hunt only biblical antecedents, biblical text to find. There's a lot of 3 days, and then there's 3 days after, and then this 3-day journey. There's a lot of that, but there's no descent into death type of 3 days and 3 nights anywhere in the Bible. And this guy admits it. But he tries to interpret Samuel Noah Kramer. He disagrees with a person who could read Sumerian, and this guy does not. He might know Hebrew, but I can't.
It's like if I'm going to go to a medical doctor, and that medical doctor says you need this prescription for this particular case. Yeah, and then I go, okay, but hey Joe Rogan, what should I do here?
Yeah.
That's what you're doing. You're doing the same thing.
That's a good point. So he goes and finds this scholar, right? And this scholar actually turns around and says, actually, this is his conclusion, he interprets that as 3 days and 3 nights descent, which is exactly what Jones tried to do in this. After asking a bona fide Assyriologist, why are you on stage, not even giving like full disclosure about who your source is in the interpretation?
Explain the nuances. I heard from this Assyriologist that said this. I heard from this guy that say this.
I just disagree with them, and I'm going to go with this guy in 1967 who's not a Sumerian academic expert.
But the way he says it in the speech was as if these people are wrong and this is right, objectively, without any nuances. He's being dishonest.
Right. And there are examples. So Josh says, yes, I remember this. I actually had a bit of interaction with Michael on this particular issue. I'll try to summarize what I told him about the Sumerian and how I think it affects one's interpretation of this passage. I'm going to read this if that's okay.
Yeah, read it.
It's beefy and it backs you up because I thought you saw my hesitation, Neal.
You were hesitant.
I was like, bro, I don't want to I don't know. We don't want to and you're like, no, Derek, I'm telling you. And I'm like, I couldn't, it didn't make sense to me at first. Now you have been totally vindicated in my head. First, I can't remember if he cited the article in his presentation that you sent me. I don't remember if he cited it either, but I don't recall him mentioning this guy. But either way, he goes on and describes William F. Albright in the early 50s at Johns Hopkins University, earned a PhD in Semitics. In the article, he deals briefly, a long paragraph on pages 448 to 449, with the descent of Inanna and the line in question. Relying on the then recent work of Kramer and Nasher, he offers his own interpretation as theirs did not seem more likely than his. He says, when one compares the text of Inanna's instruction to Ninshubar with the account of his execution of her commands, it seems clear that Ninshubar's delay is to allow sufficient time for Inanna to arrive within the netherworld. The 3 days and 3 nights are intended to cover the time of the travel to the chthonic depths. He offers
the katabasis. That's the entire point.
But he's trying to argue it took 3 days and 3 nights. And this is what Josh said.
But the point of it is there's a 3-day motif in the text.
Even
and
if you
that's
granted
all that matters.
Got it. Your point is, even if we give it, and they're wrong,
Yeah.
but even if you give it to them, someone reading this would have
It's
picked up this
still a
motif.
3-day motif, just like
Josh,
Jonah.
you know what Josh says about this? He offers no real argument for this position other than to say that separation in the narrative between this statement about the passage of time and the revival of Inanna argues against understanding Inanna to have been dead for 3 days. Okay, so here are my thoughts on all of this. First, the grammar and syntax. Line 173 of the Descent of Inanna is the line under contention here. And we could show this on the screen. It reads, which should be translated, and I can't read this, but it's like ta zalata, which should be translated after 3 days and 3 nights passed. The final ata is used to indicate that the sentence before, which without the ata would be translated simply 3 days and 3 nights passed, is now placed in a temporal dependent clause, and what follows takes place after it. As an example, if I said, Johnny went to the store, but then added ata to it, right? Like this, Johnny went to the store, ata. That would be translated after Johnny went to the store. You would be asking, what happened after Johnny went to the store? That is how this construction works. So what we need to ask ourselves is what the narrative sequence is here.
That's called pluperfect in Greek. It's a verb form that indicates something that just happened in the past.
See?
And that's why you have to have an expert read this.
This is it. So he goes, what is the order of the events? There are several examples of this type of construction being used with both in general and with specific time frames given, 3 days and 3 nights. In Merker, and in Shugarana 274, we read, in Suguranaki in Amitish. I'm going to skip these pronunciations because I'm not good.
Just show it on the screen.
Yeah, which is translated, having heard this matter, in Shugarana sent a man to Inmerker. In this section, a woman and a sorcerer had been competing with one another, and the woman had won. She ended up with him throwing him into the Euphrates River for things that he had done. The text reads, she threw her prisoner from the bank of the Euphrates. She seized from him his life force and then returned to her city, Eresh. Having heard this matter, in Shugarana sent a man to Inmerker. In other words, as simple as this sounds, these two had a contest. It ended this way, and after Inshugarana heard about it, he sent a messenger out. The ata just makes the sentence change from Inshugarana heard this matter to after Inshugarana heard this matter.
It changes the plain reading of the text disproves what Michael Jones is saying, and he's being dishonest by showing text on the screen that's not in the correct order.
Why wouldn't you have just
or maybe it's in the correct order, but you're skipping 10 verses and you're leaving out the part where Inanna's dead as a corpse on a hook, which follows immediately with the ata after 3 days and 3 nights.
Exactly.
And then it's fine. You want to argue that there's more time after that in between her and getting revived, you can, but there's no indication in the text that it happens.
No.
If you're looking at the text for the plain reading, all it seems that after she's
Hung on
dead.
a hook?
She's hung on a hook after 3 days and 3 nights, and then all this stuff happens seemingly in one day.
Meaning she's
Because
dead for
there's
3
no-
days and 3 nights.
Right. There's no indication that between the time that it says 3 days and 3 nights and the time that Enki revives her, there's no indication anywhere of any time passing besides the day that they're in.
Right.
Besides the current present tense.
So he goes.
So that's all you get.
That's
It's
it.
all you have is a 3-day motif. There's nothing else that it says.
He backs it up, of course, in this response, just giving like the death of Urnama, section C73. He gives another source, and he just points out in both examples, after X days, Y days had passed, like he proves this with X others using this same grammatical syntax, like it's showing the exact same stuff, right? Then he goes on to Enkidu and Gilgamesh, the death of Urnama, and he mentions that there are also something that vindicates your point, Neal.
Mm-hmm.
He says there are alternative, or if you will, different versions of the Inanna descent. Some of them have 3 days and 3 nights. Then some of them mention that it's 7 years, 7 months, 7 days. So there are 2 other manuscripts seem to preserve that. And then there's one that's 7 months. This is Josh's point. He's like, hold on. What this would suggest to me is that the interval between Inanna's death in the netherworld and Nishubar undertaking her mission would have been understood in different manuscripts to be 3 days and 3 nights, 7 months, or even 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days. This would be very difficult to explain, I think, if we're trying to read these intervals as the time it took to travel to the underworld. I mean, you're going to say Inanna took 7 years, 7 months, 7 days to descend, or 7 months to descend? No. It's silly. And I personally, after reading that article from 1967, think this guy's bringing his baggage from Jonah or from the Bible and kind of imposing it back. I mean, he even mentions early on how he's looking at the Gospels to kind of look at Jonah, and maybe in some way there's a connection on how we can understand Jonah through Jesus. Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. He does an interesting thing too that does talk about maybe the reason they say 3 days and 3 nights, Neal, is that in the ancient world, that was the period they believe the soul still lingered in the body. And that's why when you see Lazarus in the 4th gospel, it says he has been dead for 4 days. That's an even greater miracle because his soul has left his body. So when Jesus resurrects him, it's been beyond 3 days and 3 nights. The soul has left the body. Jesus was capable of bringing his soul back to his body. That's a radical. So there's a lot more context, but you were right.
Yep. And he does the same sort of fallacious argument with the next clip.
Thank you, Joshua Bowen. We love you. Thank you, brother.
So did Baal die and rise? So scholars like Trygve Manager, Dag Enzo will say yes, he was. Scholars like Mark Smith, J.D. Smith, Johan C. Moore, Hans Barstead, John Gibson say no, he did not die. Why is that? Why are they just, can't they just read the text? They can't, because it's fragmented. A lot of it is missing. In the tale, the god of death, Mot, challenges Baal to a fight, and then Baal descends to fight him, and then the text is missing. So we don't know what happens. It's unfortunate. But then when we come back in the story, the gods are lamenting because they think Baal is dead. They think he is dead. And then all of a sudden Baal shows up, and they're like, oh, you're alive. The end. Doesn't say he resurrected, though. Mark Smith is clear. He does not say he resurrected.
Wow.
It's very odd about Mark's, because he says Baal didn't die. Mark Smith's translation says literally, Mark Smith and Jeremiah Coogan, Baal is dead is the translation. There's another translation where it says the exact same thing. I have an article here from an academic article from Oxford Academic by Mark Smith himself. The final 2 tablets of the Baal cycle, Cat 1.5 through 1.6, certainly seem to provide evidence for Baal as a dying and rising god. Now he does talk about how there's the gap in the text,
yep.
So we can only speculate on what the text says. The nature of the resurrection we don't know about.
Right.
The point is this: in the text that we do have, Baal is dead.
Yes.
Then there's the text is destroyed, and then it says that Anat defeats the god Death, or Mot, and after the god Death is defeated, Baal rises, literally resurrects. It's just, again,
the same verb.
It's to stand.
To stand.
Baal stands again, it says.
Yes.
And so it's a mystery, Mark Smith says. It's kind of a mystery on how it happens. The consensus seems to be because the Death was defeated, Baal was able to resurrect. It sort
Yeah.
of was like a to defeat
coming
death and then life comes. Very simple, actually. That's the plain read. Once again, the plain reading of the translation disproves him so much. By the way, he shows a list on the screen of 2 scholars that think Baal died. Then he shows a list of like 5 people who think he didn't.
Yeah.
You could have put 100 people on the list on the left.
Yeah.
That was that little.
It's like, look at how
it was like a
significant.
It was like a
it's
sneaky,
psychological. Yeah.
Exactly, because I can think of I can probably pull up 100 scholars
Right.
that think Baal died.
Well, right now we know one who's actually vindicating the entire category of dying and rising gods, which we're going to be capitalizing on here in the future, debunking nonsense from William Lane Craig and stuff here on MythVision. But Paula Corrente literally
The most up to date on Baal right now is saying Baal is a dying and rising god, and so is Inanna, she says.
Yes.
She says the big 3 that Fraser was right about. These are peer-reviewed articles, peer-reviewed books through different publications that she has written in the last 5 years, saying that James Fraser is right about Dionysus, Baal,
Yep.
and James Fraser didn't really write about Inanna because
There wasn't much yet. We didn't
But
have.
she says that Inanna is a classical type
Yep.
of a dying and rising god. So Inanna, the 3 gods that we've already discussed in this video, that he's wrong about.
Yep.
According to the leading expert in anthropology, current professor as we sit right now, saying Baal, Inanna, and Dionysus are the classic types of a dying and rising god.
Just to add the icing to the cake, this wasn't just in her book, which you and I have both looked at. We've spoken to her several times.
Can I show a clip
Absolutely.
real quick?
So again, Fraser talked about the gods that I studied, Baal, Dionysus, but he didn't treat Inanna, which is the Mesopotamian goddess, because in part he talked about these myths, but he couldn't have the text that we have now. So I think Inanna is the most important of these gods, and so my dissertation focuses basically on her and Baal. So I focused on them because no one pays attention to the text about them, which I think highly interesting, because they clearly talked about the death and resurrection, or coming back from death of these gods. So there is no way of denying the death or resurrection of God if you read the Ugaritic text about Baal or the Sumerian and Akkadian text about Inanna. And with Dionysus is the same, although the case with Dionysus is more complex. I think that the category is working. We need to reorganize it, and that's what I was trying to do with my dissertation. So I think we have to make a difference between the way these gods die, because sometimes they don't die, they just disappear or they sleep, no? Instead of denying the entire category, I think it's more clever just to reorganize it. So we find that for the resurrection, they use the same word that indicate standing. For example, in Greek, the word which indicates the resurrection is the verb anistemi, which basically means standing. When you sleep in your bed and then you stand from the bed. That is the meaning of the verb. And then it was used for the resurrection. So about Jesus, for example, in the Greek text about the resurrection of Jesus, we find these verbs that then was translated into Latin, which is from where we take our resurrection, the word. And it's curious that in the text, in the Sumerian text, which is the most ancient that we have, we find the same word to indicate the resurrection of Inanna, the goddess. To say that she lives again, they use Sumerian verb to say to stand. So it's very interesting, this similarity, even in the use in the language, in the words. Because when we think about the resurrection, our first thought goes to Jesus. Of course, it's normal. But it does not mean that before Jesus, there is no proof that before Jesus, gods couldn't resurrect. Why not? The problem is that we are using the resurrection the way we know it in Christianity, and resurrection in Christianity has certain features. And we are using what we know about Christian resurrection to culture who are more ancient. We have to understand what this ancient civilization would understand from resurrection, or would express with the resurrection, and we have to see if we can apply the same word to them. But I am not a fan of this fashion now of rethinking about words. Words are not correct, we have to change the word. No, I think that we use the word resurrection. We know the word resurrection, right? With the case of Jesus, and we can use this word, and we can apply this word to other gods. And we just explain what this word means for the other gods and what this other civilization would have understand for resurrection.
So there you have it. This is current, up-to-date scholarship. No offense, but Jonathan Z. Smith is dated now. Right. That's almost half a century ago. Actually, no, it's more than that.
Yeah, it's
60 years ago.
So
I mean, I'm not saying Jonathan Z. Smith is wrong about everything, but why are we going all the way back to the 60s? I get in trouble all the time for citing for scholars from the 70s. I'm trying to think of the one I was thinking of. Anyways, not Franz Kumat, another scholar that
I get it.
That I like to read from the 70s. People go, be careful, it's in the 70s.
Yeah, but you know
C. Smith is before that.
I got a bone to pick with that because that's only used to weaponize against guys like you and me.
Bad ideas.
When I read, like even right now, Tim Whitmarsh, the ultimate gangster when it comes to classics right now, in my view, like he's up there at the upper echelon. When I was reading his Achilles Tatius, he references in the footnotes over and over 1937 such and such classicist, 1945 such and such, like he's quoting people from 30s and 40s. Why?
Yeah.
He's reading them. He knows that they're onto something. He's like, no, you're right.
Kyle Karenni is the one I was thinking about. When I was talking about, I cite Kyle Karenni all the time. People go, yeah, that's a good source, but he's a little bit dated. It's 70s.
Yeah.
Jonathan Z. Smith is from the 60s, and you have modern, up-to-date, current professors with better methodology skill saying that Jonathan Z. Smith should be questioned a little bit.
Yeah. And it's a dogma in the field.
Yeah.
It is a dogma. And when you start talking about things that are mimetic, parallels, Z. Smith has been weaponized by guys such as
who don't read
Jones. But here's the thing about Jones. He does not agree with almost everything Smith probably argues for,
right,
which we're way closer to,
right,
but then only cherry picks them to use them to go, well, Smith questioned the idea of parallel, with these kind of parallel categories.
Now, the next clip that we got, the reason why I threw this in there is because he does the same sort of fallacious argumentation where he's only looking for differences and not bringing in the nuances again. Load it up.
Was Jesus based on the Greek god Attis? It has been alleged Jesus never existed and was just a myth based on pagan gods like Attis. Mysticists claim Attis was born on December 25th of the Virgin Nana. Well, like the other alleged parallels, this is all nonsense. First, I can find no reference to Attis being associated with December 25th, and I challenge any mysticist to offer evidence of it from a pre-Christian era. He was also not born of a virgin. According to the myth, Zeus dropped some of his seed on a mountain that looked like the goddess Rhea, and from that arose a wild demonic creature called Agdistis. The other gods found him annoying, so while he slept, Dionysus tied a rope around his genitals and frightened him to wake him up. In a panic, he castrated himself. From the blood, a tree sprang up, and later on the goddess Nana came by to pick some of the fruit. She then set it in her lap, it disappeared, and she later became pregnant with Attis. If this has anything to do with the conception of Jesus, then someone please explain it to me. How this connects to the virgin birth of Christ through Mary is beyond me.
The reason why this is so fallacious, if I wanted to take King David and say King David has nothing to do with Jesus, which we know he does, we know that they're drawing from David, the new David, all I have to do is go through the books of Samuel and Ruth or whatever, and Kings and Chronicles or whatever I could find, and just look for everything David did that Jesus didn't do.
Right.
And go, look, David was this. David played a harp. Jesus didn't
Yeah.
play a harp.
David killed some of his own sons. He had children. He slept with a woman who was married with someone.
Jesus didn't do all that.
No, he's not.
And then you're just like, well, wait a minute. What about this, and this? What about the nuance? Where's the nuance?
Yeah.
And you don't get that with Jones. And so I wanted to bring up something. I agree with him that, well, he's only zeitgeist.
At least he was fair.
At least he was fair and said it was zeitgeist. Fine.
Yep.
Zeitgeist is wrong about those sources. They don't exist. There is a December 25th, but Michael Jones is correct that it's later.
Yep.
It's from Macrobius to Saturnalia, where he says Attis is also born at the winter solstice, which was December 25th at that time. Now, that's true. That's a later source. We don't have to use that. The point is, during the reign of Claudius, we have multiple sources. Robert Turkin's Mystery Cults is like the standard text on this. There's also the Oxford edition of Greco-Roman religions, a source book. These two texts that are up to date, modern scholarly texts, explain that during the reign of Claudius, which is the 40s to the late 50s, he instituted a new religious festival that starts on the Ides of March. Now, according to Ovid and Virgil, on the Ides of March every year, from the 1st century BCE till I don't know when they stopped doing it. We don't really know. The sources don't tell us. But it certainly was happening in the 1st century.
Of course.
And on the Ides of March, the priests of Jupiter, the Flamen Dialis, would sacrifice a white lamb at nighttime in front of the Roman Forum. So on this very day, where there's a white lamb sacrificed on the Ides of March, full moon, it's actually lines up with the same day as Jesus, believe it or not, which makes me,
so Ides of March, is this specifically Passover?
It's where the Passover starts. Now the Passover changes because it's based on the lunar, it's based on the first Sunday. I don't know. It's based on, but it's the same week.
Right.
It's gonna fall in the same week every year.
Got it.
Now, what happens on this day? They started a new festival of Attis and the Great Mother that went all the way to the March 27th. But that's 27th. It's added by Marcus Aurelius. Mm-hmm. So it's called the Day of Washing. This is how we know. This is how we can anchor this in between Claudius and Marcus Aurelius, that they had this festival of Attis where it was called the Day of Blood, where people would mourn for the death of Attis, and there would be priests initiated by cutting off their pretty wild stuff. That 3 days, so that would happen on March 25th. Mm-hmm. Or I'm sorry, March 22nd.
Got it.
Was the Day of Blood. This was instituted by Claudius. On March 25th, 3 days later, this is why I put Attis in next. 3 days later, you can look this up for yourself in the calendar from Philolacus. 3 days later is the day of rejoicing of the resurrection of Attis. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in a mythology that we have in our sources. There might have been a source, there might have not. The point is, there was a festival during the 1st century, in the middle of the 1st century, instituted by Claudius. They added days during the reign of Marcus Aurelius in the 160s. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's how we know it's between the 160s at the latest, where we have a day of rejoicing, and the time of Claudius, who institutes this festival. We don't know, it's true, even Turkin points this out, we don't know the exact details of how this week went on when it was first instituted by Claudius. We know it from the sources that show up later. Right. But we know that the Attis festival, the death and resurrection festival of Attis, was instituted in the 1st century, and we know that Marcus Aurelius added a day of washing on the 27th.
So let's cover a few indicators that you think that stick out to you.
Right.
And what me and you do is we do look for similarities. We recognize there's differences, but we also know that there's cultural diffusion and syncretism that takes place. So they don't really pay attention to that because they have isolated invisible.
And you can have festivals, not just myths, not just written texts that influence written texts.
Right.
Because the Passover influences Jesus too. That's a festival.
Exactly.
So
I think you're right. No, you're right. So we have white lamb.
A white lamb being sacrificed on March 15th every year.
Okay, so Passover
that kicks off. Oh yeah, and another thing that's in the sources, they would have this from March 15th until March 22nd. It was like Lent, where certain foods you couldn't eat. You had to eat I think it was like honey and milk or something, and everything else was off limits.
Okay.
So for people that were in this priesthood. So there was something like a Lent. I'm not saying it is Lent, but I'm saying there was some sort of some sort of ritual eating thing going on.
Got it.
Between the 15th and the 22nd. On the 22nd, they would bring in the reed carriers, the canophoroi, would bring in a pine tree, and they would bury the pine tree with an Attis figurine on the pine tree.
Got it.
They would bury the god as if he was dead. Then they would go into mourning for 3 days. On the third day, they call it on the March 25th, which according to the sources, March 25th is the day Jesus resurrected.
Yeah.
I swear to God, I'm not making this up.
I know.
So on the same day Jesus resurrects, they have a day of rejoicing.
Got it.
And then it followed by a day of washing that was added by Marcus Aurelius. And the reason why that's key is because it anchors us to at least the 160s, where we have all these other details of the resurrection. So we're in the 2nd century. We're contemporary with the Gospels. It starts in the 1st century under Claudius, according to all the experts. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because there's nuance here in Attis. It doesn't have to be the myth from 3rd century BC. The source that he's mentioned right there is from Timotheus.
Yep.
He didn't even mention Timotheus. But I know what he's reading because I know that source. It's from Timotheus. You're right. That version of the story, there's not a lot of parallels between the Gospels and that. But this festival, which happens at the same week as Easter.
And this is a mystery cult.
It's a mystery cult. By the way, one more thing to prove my point right here, that I'm not just making all this up. What do we get from the Nicene preacher through the sources? Hippolytus in I think 178 or something, is writing about the Nicene preacher who lived decades prior. Probably in the middle, probably 140s to 150s, something like that. The Nicene preacher talks about the mystery of Attis as a prefigured mystery of Christ.
That he sees there.
And I'm showing the text on the screen word for word. Mm-hmm. He basically says, I'm summing up on the screen what it says. He basically says that I tell my initiates to go and visit the mysteries of Attis, for we can see that our mystery within their mystery.
Yeah. Exactly.
So you have Attis or you have Christ followers mingling with the Attis followers in Rome in the middle of the 2nd century.
But what really interests the people about the Nazarenes is really heavy, vibrant engagement with Greek mystery cults. They are responding to Greek mysteries and integrating the knowledge that they have from the Greek mysteries into their understanding of Christianity. And in effect, seeing the Greek mysteries as equivalent to Jewish prophecies, that is, as symbolically referring to Christ. As I said, he's able to find Christ, whom he calls typically the child of the human, who inhabits all people. He's able to find this in the cultic descriptions, specifically of the god Attis.
And at the very least, Neal, there is some kind of cultural diffusion, of course, cultural syncretism, where overlap is happening in some way, where these mystery cults, which I would put Christianity into this box, is as Christ associations with John Kloppenborg. There's some type of possible influence that's happening. And if we add the idea of him being castrated, if you will, that he
Carrier points out correctly that people say, well, crucifixion, that's a criteria of embarrassment. Carrier says, well, Attis was castrated.
And they were proud of it.
Isn't that not the criteria of embarrassment? He says, Attis crucified, or Attis castrated, Christ crucified. That's a solid point.
Right.
As much as I disagree with Carrier on things, he's right about that.
Yes.
That's a solid point.
Eunuchs. Jesus says in Matthew that the greatest thing you can be is a eunuch for the kingdom of God.
And by the way,
go into the Jewish sources. Look at how it treats people whose balls are crushed.
But this is in Phrygia.
Right.
Where Pergamon is, where the temple of the city of Pergamon,
near Galatia,
isn't
it?
Right next to Galatia.
See,
right next to Galatia, where there's a huge population of Christians thriving in this cultural diffusion, basically.
And what's interesting is Paul's letter written to the Galatians. We need to add this point because he says to the Galatians, he tells them, he's so frustrated about circumcision. He goes, you might as well cut the whole damn thing off. Some scholars have noted that this may be a jab at Attis cults.
Yeah,
in the
who's
region.
in that region. Yeah.
Yes.
And I forgot to mention, I'm glad I just thought of this. There's another parallel too, with not just the Attis mysteries, but also in Mithraic mysteries, where the initiates of the mysteries of Attis would be washed in the blood of a bull. Literally, they would take a bull,
Yep.
sacrifice the bull, it would go under a chamber, and the blood would wash the new initiate.
Washed in the blood of the lamb?
Blood of the lamb, which is in multiple verses in the New Testament.
Right.
Wash in the blood of the bull. Someone like Michael Jones said, well, one's a bull and one's a lamb. That's the point.
Yeah.
The bull is sacred to various Mithraic mysteries, and Dionysus was considered to be the bull who was sacrificed.
That's true.
In a lot of sources in the Orphic mysteries, Dionysus was the bull. So Jesus is the lamb because of the Passover lamb.
Right.
He's the Passover lamb. They're Judaizing.
He's the Jewish mystery. That's the point. Judaized mystery.
Don't forget, they also sacrifice a lamb on March 15th.
Right.
So there's
there's
so much to draw from.
And look, you're not even saying that this means he didn't exist. But here's the thing about you and me. We're not dogmatic.
No.
We're open to the fact that what if we're dealing
There's
with
a slight
creativity
chance-
and they invented some of this material that we don't know is history.
And there's a slight chance that they're borrowing from each other at the same time, contemporary, because we're seeing the Attis cult rise up in the 40s, same time as Paul. And then we see right around the time the New Testament's getting widespread, we see the widespreadness of the Attis cult.
Yeah.
So there's a very good chance that they're both sort of spinning off of each other. And that to me makes more sense.
I mean, I always thought, it's common sense to me, mystery cults are going to imitate and have models similar to mystery cults.
Right.
It's that simple.
That's how it is.
And that's why you're going to find crossover and overlap, because they're doing similar things.
Yeah.
Immortality for each personal person who's an initiate devotee.
Secret knowledge,
all that. Man, there's so much here.
Yeah.
Horus was born of a virgin Isis on December 25th in a cave. Star in the east announced his birth. He was visited by 3 wise men. He had an earthly father named Seth, which translates to Joseph. He was baptized by Anub the baptizer. He had 12 disciples. He performed miracles like walking on water, raised El Osiris from the dead. He gave a sermon on the mount, was crucified between 2 thieves, buried for 3 days and was resurrected. He was called Christ, anointed one, the way, the truth, the light, Messiah, Son of Man. Pretty convincing. That sounds a lot like Jesus, right? What do you say when someone says this to you? Source. Okay, you just can't make that claim. All of this is practically wrong. None of this is in any ancient Egyptian sources. Someone says Horus was born on December 25th. I go, what's your source? Where does it say that? Sometimes they'll be like, well, it's in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Really? You know, we got phones now. I can pull that up right now. I can pull up Egyptian Book of the Dead translation. Tell me where it is. They won't do it because it doesn't exist.
Oh, the next one after this is going to be Osiris, so I'm going to kind of combine these two. But I want no. I want to touch on Horus because there is a source from Plutarch that suggests that his birth was around the winter solstice. All right, I'm going to read the source real quick. It says, about the time of the winter solstice, she gave birth, Isis, to Harpocrates, which in Greek means Horus the child, imperfect and premature, amid the early flowers and shoots. For this reason, they bring him as an offering the first fruits of growing lentils, and the days of his birth they celebrate at the spring equinox. Interesting. You get the winter solstice connected to the spring equinox. Once again, you find this in Dionysian mysteries too. There's something connection with them. Now, so does that mean he's born on December 25th? No, I agree with him on that. That's wrong. But you have a primary source that suggests that his birth was celebrated around, or at least marked around the winter solstice, which, if we actually take this into consideration here, December 25th doesn't even come till later for Christians. It was January 6th at first, as we pointed out, which is around the winter solstice. So you have two traditions, the Christians and the Horus cult, or the Isis Serapis cult, if you will, that both have a birth of the divine child around the winter solstice. It seems to be a motif that the divine child is born at the time when the sun starts to rise again.
Right.
That just seems to be pretty obvious. One more thing before I want to tie him into Osiris. Got it. Because him and Osiris are linked as a dyad. The father and the son. As you get in Christianity with this idea with the father and the son are one, this is the case
and you see
with Horus.
With Dionysus and Zeus, by the way. Same thing.
This is the case with Horus and Osiris so much. Horus represents the risen Osiris. Osiris represents the dead god. And in the old coffin text, the old ancient Egyptian from the Middle Kingdom, the Old Kingdom, the newer kingdom, before the Greeks were there, the pharaohs were called Horus. When a pharaoh died, he became Osiris. Very similar to like Caesar, how the Romans would have a Caesar, and then he would name his successor Augustus. You had this father-son dyad thing going on. That's one thing that I want to point out. Another thing, in Diodorus of Sicily, 1st century BC, there's a source that says the following. Furthermore, Horus dies. So I'm just going to point that out. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Horus is dead. Something happens to him. He gets in trouble with Anubis, and Seth does something. He gets killed. Furthermore, this is talking about Isis. Isis discovered the drug which gives immortality, by means of which she did not raise from the dead her son Horus.
Yes.
Resurrection. Horus has a physical resurrection in Diodorus of Sicily. The word they use in Greek, anastase.
It's a stand.
To stand. Check this out. Anastase. Ready for this?
If
you look that up, I'm showing on the screen the etymology of it. It means to resurrect or to make stand. Now, Mark 10 has the exact same word used from Mark 10:34, where they say, and after 3 days he shall rise again. They use the word anasticetai. It's the same word in different verb form.
Exactly.
And then they have the Mark 9, verse 9. It says, and as they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them that they tell no man the things that they had seen, save when they see the Son of Man should have been risen again from the dead. This time they use the exact same word, anaste.
Wow.
Exact same word.
Yeah.
And one more example. There's multiple examples. I just want to give one more.
Yeah.
Luke 16:31 says, and he said unto him, if they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if one rise from the dead. They use the same word once again, anaste. So you have the same word being used for Osiris or for Horus, who resurrects on earth. He doesn't go into underworld. We're about to hear Mike make a fallacious argument that Jewish resurrection is different from Egyptian. Well, that if you want to, you're arguing about old Egyptian texts. I'm talking about contemporary Greco-Roman, Greco-Egyptian sources. Diodorus of Sicily wrote in 50 BCE,
right before
the
Testament
Gospels.
starts happening.
And in this source, Horus literally has an anastase, rises from death on planet Earth, a physical bodily resurrection with the same word.
And I imagine if we went into the sources, Mary Cawthor has a book about miracles, and she goes through these primary sources. Heracles raises people from the dead. You brought up Isis raises her son from the dead, and others, by the way.
And that's a triad.
Asclepius also raises people from the dead. She goes through various sources, and then even philosophers have the ability to raise people from the dead. You have Vespasian performing miracles, but the specific resurrection of the dead you're bringing up, like why? This is a question lingering over mine and your head. It's like, why do you not look at those and take those serious?
Yep.
Why aren't you at least considering that's real? They believed it back then.
He made it seem like there's no resurrection of Horus and there's no divine birth of Horus at the winter solstice. I just showed you both of those are true, and they're contemporary with the Gospels.
So when it comes to Osiris, Egyptian resurrection doesn't mean Jewish resurrection. Equivocating on the term resurrection, it means something different in different cultures. Henry Frankfurt said a while back, Osiris, in fact, was not a dying god at all, but a dead god. He never returned among the living. He was not liberated from the world of the dead. On the contrary, Osiris altogether belonged to the world of the dead. It was from there that he bestowed his blessings upon Egypt. He was always depicted as a mummy, a dead king. In Egyptian mythology, resurrection does not mean you return to life on this plane of existence. It means you die, your body stays here, your soul goes to the Amduat, the underworld, and you're given a new body there. Therefore, you're resurrected. And you stay there. You can't return here. So you're gone forever. That's not what Jews and Christians mean by resurrection. Other scholars like J.Z. Smith said, in no sense can Osiris be said to have risen in the sense required by the dying and rising pattern. In no sense can the dramatic myth of his death and reanimation be harmonized to the pattern of dying and rising gods. The repeated formula, rise up, you have not died, whether applied to Osiris or a citizen of Egypt, signaled a new, permanent life in the realm of the dead. Shirgay Manager says Osiris rose to continued life in the netherworld. The general connotations are that he was a god of the dead.
First of all, I already showed you that Horus has a resurrection under his own definition.
Right.
But Osiris does too.
Okay.
From Plutarch, once again, written in the 110s. Okay, so he never mentions the Gospels in any of his writings. He's not copying the Gospels.
Of course.
Okay, he says, when Isis found Osiris's body, she mourned over it with her sister Nephthys, which is very much like the two women at the tomb at the end.
Okay.
And this happens in a lot of sources with Osiris when he's dead. It's two women who are mourning over him. It's always like that. She mourned over it with her sister Nephthys and called upon the help of the gods to protect and preserve what remained. She used her magical incantations and laments to breathe life into him temporarily, allowing him to conceive Horus before departing the underworld. He comes back to the earth through her magic.
Yeah.
He's back on planet Earth, alive, gets a boner, has sex with her, conceives Horus, which was considered to be the resurrected form of Osiris on planet Earth, according to the ancient Egyptians, not even Plutarch. But here's the point. He does come back to life on this plane of existence,
right.
Just like Jesus does. And then what happens to Jesus after he
disappears?
He disappears again.
So what
he
is
does the same thing Jesus does.
Don't you feel, again, here we are back to the tactics that I see used. It's like, let's hone in on so many closeness molecules, like the molecular level of something, to try and lose and distract people from seeing what's happening.
Yep.
Look, you even proved with his own logic, right, that he's temporarily brought back to life here in the real world. Now, here's the problem, Neal. As you're highlighting something, Jesus comes back, but if it was really about resurrected life here or in real world, why does he disappear and go off into another realm into heaven? Why isn't Jesus dwelling here? Why has he got a temporary, depending on which gospel you look at, a temporary existence here just for a moment and then disappears? Like, this whole idea that Jesus is physical body and he's really resurrected, he's still resurrected here, he's alive right now. Why does he have to go and disappear from all sight and no one can actually see him or know that he's alive?
Yeah.
Like, that's what we find in these other stories.
And Plutarch is actually hearkening back to a source from 1700 BCE in a coffin text where it says, they find the dismembered parts of Osiris and unite them through their spells and cries of mourning. And this was considered to be his physical bodily resurrection before returning back to the underworld. Another source about Osiris, it says, this is from Plutarch again. Or no, I'm sorry, this is from Diodorus.
Got it. So it's the same source
BC.
you just brought up about Horus.
First century BC, right? Around 50 BC, he writes this. In general, there is a great disagreement over these gods, for the same goddess is called by some Isis, by others Demeter, by others Thesmophoros, by others Selena, by others Hera, while still others apply to all her names. Osiris has been given the name Serapis by some, Dionysus by others, Pluto by others, Ammon by others, Zeus by some, and many have considered Pan to be the same god, and say that the Serapis is the god who the Greeks call Pluto. So he's pointing out, and then Diodorus also says, Horus is portrayed as the avenger and inheritor of Osiris's role. So through the death and getting her pregnant before he returns to the underworld, he puts his soul, the breath of his life, the Ankh, into Horus. So Horus is the resurrect, in a sense.
He's the son of God.
It doesn't say that, but yeah, he's the son of God who is one with the Father. There's a dyad there. This is represented in the Hermetic mysteries too. They highlight this. So there's a lot there.
Yep.
There's a lot to draw from. Now, the reason why I pointed out the other source about him being synced with all these other gods, like Pluto and Serapis and Dionysus, is because Plutarch also seconds this from Diodorus, where he says, the Greeks consecrate the ivy to Dionysus, and they say that this is the plant of Osiris. And then a couple sentences down, he says, Hermaeus too, he's citing a source from 100 BC or something like that, makes this statement in the first volume of his book on the Egyptians, for he says that Osiris, properly interpreted, means sturdy. I leave out the account of Menasius, 3rd century BC, annexation of Dionysus, Osiris, and Serapis to Epaphus. This Menasius character from the 3rd century BC says Osiris, Serapis, and Dionysus are all Epaphus. Who's Epaphus? I'll give you a source from Plutarch. Osiris and Serapis together makes them the same with Epaphus. Epaphus is the Zeus-begotten god and named from the laying of hands on himself, on Isis. Isis is born of, it's a virgin birth of Zeus touching her womb.
Not sex.
No sex. She touches her womb and gives birth to Epaphus, who is, according to Diodorus and Plutarch,
Dionysus,
Osiris and Horus.
Dang.
And Dionysus.
Yeah.
So he's born of a virgin, and then it says, here's John Zetzi says, where from the touch of Zeus, she gives birth to Epaphus, whose mother is Libya, whose son is Belus. One more source that's going to blow your mind about Horus. I wanted to tie these together. Horus, in this source from Plutarch, says that these are nearly all important points of the legend, with the omission of the most infamous of the tales, such as that of the dismemberment of Horus. What? Wait, now it's
Osiris was dismembered.
Osiris is
the sun being
dismembered.
dismembered.
Horus is dismembered. Dionysus is dismembered. It's the dismemberment. It's the death and resurrection myth.
Total throwing this out there at the wall, but you notice how Acts 17 talks about a tomb of Zeus. You kind of wonder, because we know Dionysus is dismembered.
Yeah.
Why is Zeus said to have died, and how did he die?
Right.
I mean, there's no source for it, but you know.
No, that's great. It's a great point.
Just
because
think about it.
The point is, in all this cultural milieu, these are all contemporary sources. They're all 1st century BC, 1st century Common Era. You have either with Horus, Dionysus, or Osiris, who they say all of them are Epaphus. Yeah. There's a virgin birth. There's a
death,
there's a winter solstice myth. There's a spring. By the way, Osiris' death is on the 17th of the month that Jesus dies.
Got it.
So it's basically March 17th. March 17th. According to Osiris, is the day that Osiris is killed.
Plutarch, or
according to Plutarch, Osiris is killed right after the full moon of the spring equinox, the same week that Jesus is killed.
So there's
you have the spring equinox resurrection and death. You have a winter solstice birth.
Right.
You have a virgin birth. I mean, all the pieces are there in the culture. It's not one myth that says all this.
No.
You sort of have to look
Syncretism.
around. Yeah, that's the point.
I like this. I like what you're saying here. And again, mythicists would love this. And this is why Jones fights this, because people can come in and go, well, what if this guy was completely whole cloth invented by pulling and grabbing motifs and themes?
And I don't think that.
No, I don't
I
either.
think they're drawing from the cultural milieu.
Again, but just emphasize this point for him and his audience that might be like getting this idea that he's generalizing all zeitgeisty, right? Well, you could still say there was a guy, and the mythology of all this stuff is being painted on him. But the question is, as he says, well, we don't know. That doesn't mean it didn't happen or there isn't any history there. Good luck finding what happened, dude.
Right.
We're not saying there isn't a historical dude or that maybe there's some history there, but as I'm going to read later, you're going to see a quote from Richard C. Miller. Like, how can you ascertain that?
You're gonna love it. We're gonna be destroyed. We're gonna be destroyed. I'm telling you. I'm so.
See, this is the power of the MythVision. No, I honestly, Derek, if you're out there, I like the guy personally. Like, we get along.
Yeah,
we're kind of like frenemies, I guess. And so good guy, bad arguments. So yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. He's a nice guy. Got to the end of this video and was like, that's it. Like, first of all, I knew about these texts because I've read JP Holding, who has brought them up. Wasn't convinced when I read them then, and not convinced now, and we're going to cover that. So
he didn't actually read the text. He read a secondary source about the text and was told what to think.
So yes, he literally makes a few admissions there. Number one, personally on the dudes, I don't really know them, but I imagine, like most people, they're probably decent people in real life. I don't know them though. So I tend to think they might be good guys. I cannot describe how incorrect and how far off I think they really are. Their arguments are terrible to me. Absolutely terrible. And special pleading on every breath that comes out that is defending or trying to make their case sounds like special pleading. So the first thing is, I want to point out, destroyed. You've been destroyed. Notice something. They didn't advertise it. They never told anyone, but that's David Wood. They're imitating David Wood.
Because you know both sources.
I know the source.
I don't know David Wood. I could be like, how do you know he's borrowing from David Wood? Where do they say that?
They don't.
Because I never saw that.
They don't. But
where does he say? So you're wrong then.
He's imitating David Wood.
Parallelomania, Derek.
Using their logic. I am making parallelomania.
But yeah,
that's a good point.
And I didn't know that until you pointed it out.
Well, it gets even further. This is inception, because David Wood is mocking Muslim apologist with this. So here is a Muslim apologist that David Wood is mocking, and then the Christian apologists are imitating David Wood to go, you have been destroyed. Now, what's funny is this is because I have insider knowledge.
It was a polemic from a different culture. That turned into a fun thing that they're doing now.
Now they're doing it.
See how culture works?
So this is,
and there's nowhere does he say, we just cited David Wood who cited this Muslim guy.
No, but
you had to find that in the sources.
If you're ignorant and you don't know how things operate culturally or even know this source, like you just said, you would not know that's David Wood. And if I tried to tell you that's David Wood,
good point,
you wouldn't know it.
Well
you would
said.
need to hear them say, hey, this is David Wood I'm imitating. Now, here's a quote, and it says, this is the exact same problem that apologists face when reading the Gospels. And I truly think Dr. Jeff Tripp sums it up really well, and this is the text he sent me. Quote, one way devotional readers approach the text is to treat it like it was written for them, like they're the intended audience, but they usually only know the Old Testament as far as a potential pop culture background, meaning the only bit of knowledge that the apologists really know and really immerse themselves with is Old Testament. That's important to understand as background knowledge, because only framework they have, if you don't know David Wood going, destroyed, then when they do it, if you don't know that, you will not know where that comes from. You might go, that's original. That's original to them. There's no antecedent.
They never cited anybody.
So he goes on and says, if you're asking them to consider unfamiliar things like Euripides and the reference points for the actual intended readers back then,
which were the Greeks,
you're highlighting a difference between them and the original audience.
Right.
In a sense, you're saying this wasn't written for you. They will be instinctively resistant, as it shows, and hostile to this line of reasoning, probably at an unconscious level. That's why I try to empathize. It's tough dealing with what sounds and we know is false or erroneous. It comes across as dishonest, so it's easy to go, you're lying, you're dishonest.
Yep.
The other part of me goes, you're just deceived and delusionally stuck in this.
Yep.
And I can't help but do that. So mind you, Dr. Tripp has written extensively, just to give more context, on the Gospel of John. This guy has read it in original Greek. He has done deep work researching the Gospel of John. He knows this. And so he's coming from a scholarly angle. I wanted to make that point. Now let's switch back to the Old Testament, because this is an important point coming from your end, Neal.
So, at the end of the day, even if you can show similarities with Jesus and these alleged pagan deities, it doesn't prove anything. We have no evidence that Jesus was being compared to them in the New Testament, but even if they were, it could just be, hey, reminds me of that one God I heard about kind of thing. But at the end of the day, they're quoting the Old Testament. They're not quoting pagan literature. And there's no evidence they actually were focusing on that. So
he does this little sleight of hand thing because they're not doing this, but even if they did, it's just a little bit, who cares? And then he goes, but they're not quoting. Actually, no, they're literally quoting from not only from the philosophical side, but from pagan myths itself.
100%.
Titus, for example, cites Epimenides, but Epimenides itself was citing another source that comes from Greek mythology of Medea, saying Cretans are all liars. Medea, the witch Medea, is the one who first says Cretans are all liars. But that goes right into Paul's mouth in the New Testament.
Yeah, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. So I wrote a few things here just to make the point so that I'm not missing something. Scholars have long noted the authors of the Gospels would have been in the know of the literature like Homer and Euripides when learning to write and read. So we need to, like, background knowledge. They would have known this, learning how to construct the thing we're reading today.
It's just how they learn how to read.
That's like saying, if I were able to...
You learned Homer, you learned Euripides, you learned Aeschylus. That's how you learn how to read and write.
Read and write. In the first century, this is how they did it.
Back in March, I gave this talk. Here are my slides from that. Okay, this is important stuff here, so that I want to cover beforehand. So one of the points I made is that, look, if you want to show that Jesus is a copy of pagan deities, there are steps that you need to do. And this is not me like moving the goalpost. This would flow from basic philosophy, basic historical methodology. So you first need to show there are correlations. Then you need to show they're not just hasty generalization.
Yeah. So first things first.
What he just said is made up. This is not from basic methodology and history. He just made up these lists right here. We already talked about this earlier in the video.
Yeah, correlations, right? And he even, I think, later grants that there's some possible correlations, but they're all vague and have no connection, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so actually specific. So to give an example, when we look at like Noah in the flood account and we see the flood accounts in other Mesopotamian literature, we go, oh, okay, there's definitely some similarities that are very specific here that are far more than hasty generalizations. There's probably some literary connection. Then you need to show the correlations predate Christianity. So you need to show they're specific. It can't be like, oh, Dionysus did miracles associated with wine, the most common drink in the ancient world. So you need to do that, and you need to show they're pre-Christian, because the Christians can't copy texts that came later.
Okay, just to comment on that, Neal, you see the problem with this already. Like, he just literally downplayed all of Dionysian miracle working with wine as if it's insignificant. It's just ubiquitous. And there's, like, I guess to reverse the question, wouldn't you ask, what other gods are transforming wine and doing miraculous feats like this?
And having them land at the same day and having them using jugs that are for ritual purification. I mean, we hash this out. Yeah, but it's like we have to keep pointing it out because he keeps bringing up his list as if he got it from some sort of like, standard. It's like some standard list from somewhere. He made this list up. Remember that, and then he does grant you those first four, and then 5 has nothing to do with the first 4. If someone can still exist. And you can still draw from mythology.
Bingo.
So that's a big point.
I like this. And I think he's setting this up as like hey, if you can meet this expectation, but notice you're never going to meet my expectation of what I need in order to be achieved.
That's what it is. He's setting this it's like playing a game. It's like he created a game out of it, and he's going to create the rules and be the referee. And as long as you follow his rules and the impossible rules that he lists, then it's fine. But it's designed to distance himself from any inspiration or any influence from non-Jewish sources.
Well said.
And you also need to show a causal link. So if you don't have anything where there's like direct quotations, like with the Gilgamesh account and the flood account, it's hard to show there's a direct connection if you don't actually have him saying anything. So we know, for example, the New Testament quotes and uses the Old Testament. Why? Because they say we're citing the scriptures. We're referring to the Torah of Moses and what the prophets taught. So we can show a causal link there. Okay. And then, now Derek doesn't believe Jesus.
What about in Titus, where he cites Epimenides?
Right.
I mean, are you going to start saying that they're citing from pagans after that? I mean, you just kind of locked yourself in there.
That's why your clip over there in the Old Testament and stuff like that, like he almost is backing himself into a corner. And then when you do point the evidence, what will he say? Well, it's only that one spot. It's only in the places where we know that he's quoting. And it's like, oh, okay, well, we'll get to that.
It was a total myth, but he thinks a lot of the stories about Jesus are legendary. So then he would need to show that they are actually legendary. And that's an important step, because even if you can fulfill steps 1 to 4, you still can't get step 5.
Okay, let me ask you a question, Neal. This is so important. Would I need to work overtime to show something as legend when every example around it that you don't accept literally happened and believe is what happened, from wine miracles to resurrections? You covered Horus, Osiris, Attis. I mean, bro, the list goes on what we've been discovering over these years. Would I need to then like show and somehow prove the floating into a cloud or virgin birth or any of that is legend? Or is it really somehow on their side to try and prove that legend didn't happen?
It's on their side to prove that this happened. But not only that, you can have people who literally exist, who are real people. Caesar Augustus, Alexander the Great, Mithridates. I'll give you some examples. I'll put money in my mouth. Mithridates was born with the star in the east, signifying a king would be born.
Yeah.
It's from a source from the 150s BCE. You have with Alexander the Great,
clearly,
you have all this mythology, him doing all types of miracles and becoming the son of God, and having a miraculous birth. Do we think that stuff happened? No, but Alexander existed. So it doesn't matter. And the same with Caesar Augustus doing the same stuff, having a signified star in the east.
He appeared to people on Roman roads after they were dead,
right?
Showed up and gave instruction to people on roads.
He even posted gospels around, evangelions. We have all his parallel stuff with him. He existed. He did all this miraculous stuff. Titus Caesar healed a lame man's arm and made a blind man see by spitting in his eye.
Do I need to prove that Augustus is legendary, that Alexander's legendary, that Apollonius of Tyana is legendary?
No.
Okay, so then why
they're real people with legends about them.
Right.
It's just this is just how mythology and legends. George Washington never told a lie. That's mythology.
Right.
Did George Washington not exist now?
Because, and I point this out in the end of the talk, which Derek did in length, we see real life events commonly linked to mythology. Like, look at how they took JFK and said, well, it's just like Camelot. Okay? We do this today with saying things like he's got a Midas touch, or she's a modern day Robin Hood, or a modern day Sherlock Holmes.
Proving our point. Yeah. He just proved our point. Did he realize what he just said is exactly what we're saying?
Right. I mean, look, if he said she's a modern day Robin Hood, do you literally think she's a Robin Hood and did everything Robin Hood has said in the account to have done? No. She's helping out the poor.
And you and I have said that Jesus, if he existed, which we think he did, most likely, we can't prove that he did. We can't prove that he didn't, certainly. I think it's more likely that he did exist.
Of course.
Is it possible that people who wrote the Gospels remember things in his life that reminded them about these myths? Yes.
It could.
That's what I said. I'm fine with that.
How can you know?
We just don't know the degree of that.
How do you know what is and what isn't?
Yeah, we don't know the degree of that, so we can only speculate on what he really did versus what is being written about him as legend. But I'm fine with people saying he must have did something that reminded him of that.
Right.
Sure. We're on good terms there.
Bingo. He brought up Midas touch. He brought up Robin Hood. He brought up these examples. And in my mind, it's like, you do know that these real life, actual modern day people didn't do those actual, like, nothing fantastic. Mm-hmm. They're just saying, wow, what a great guy. Like, you might even say, dude, he fought like Hercules.
Napoleon was called Apollo. They drew pictures they had paintings in the 18th century, or actually early 19th century, of Napoleon drawing a chariot with the sun behind his head as Apollo.
Did he actually do that?
No, he didn't ride in the clouds.
Of course.
But that's what they depicted him as. What? They might have saw him on a horse.
Yeah.
They might have saw him on a horse with his battle gear on, and then it reminded him of Apollo, and then they made him into a really Apollo, which didn't actually happen that way. That's more likely what happened with Jesus.
Child prodigy, just like Alexander the Great. You have the virgin birth. So technically, using his own logic, we could go back to the historical Jesus and say, if we grant that there's a guy, we can go back to him and go, well, he was a really charismatic, important person to this group of people. Virgin birth, they're just obviously embellishing that. Prodigy, Alexander the Great.
90% of normal scholars are saying.
Exactly.
And it's just not Gary Habermas or the guys that he likes.
Nope.
That Robert Price goes through the Gospels and shows how they're drawing from various Old Testament texts. But contra Price, that doesn't mean that they just went through the Old Testament and said, all right, let's take this one, and let's take this one, and let's take this one. It's far more likely they had a life and a story of Jesus in front of them. And they said, you know what that reminds me of? Exodus 18.
Right.
Oh, you know, that reminds me of Jonah 1. Because there's no pattern here other than the life of Jesus. They're just drawing incredibly randomly from the Old Testament.
I don't know if I agree with this. And
plus in order to be a Messiah, you have to fulfill the Old Testament. Right. So they're gonna be drawing from the Old Testament more than was actually there.
Yeah, so
that's well easily established.
This is kind of his subjective opinion, right? Where he's like, okay, I think they had the life of Jesus, and then they saw things, and then they connected dots to the Old Testament to say he fulfilled these things, which he probably literally believes he really fulfilled those things. Whereas you and me would probably reverse that role and suggest they might, not saying a real...
They might have had sayings of Jesus in the gospel times. This is decades later. This is a long time has passed.
And so if you're going to craft your Messiah, you're going to craft your hero, why wouldn't you use models of that? And when I read about these things in the Gospels, it sounds more like a story being written rather than here's the mundane biography of a literal dude. This isn't Thucydides, right?
It's not going to get anybody to follow your cause.
No.
From the Old Testament. And we know ancient authors did this. Like Rihanna Nash says Tacitus embodied such points in the very language which he used. And he uses linguistic echoes and structural similarities. Jan Bremer and
Notice how he brings up Tacitus, but doesn't talk about the actual Titus Caesar making blind people see and making their arms grow back, because that's too close. He doesn't want to say that now, does he?
It's amazing he brings up Tacitus, and of course we know Suetonius with Augustus, and there's so much stuff.
And Virgil on the screen right now. And Virgil, who's drawing from Homer, who writes the Aeneid, who has characters from Homer,
right?
Who talks about the end of the Trojan War, which is from Homer,
right?
Completely drawing from Homer in a different language, Latin. It's no longer Greek now. Does he ever cite Homer? Never. Not even once in his writings does he ever mention Homer. But we all know he's drawing from Homer.
We all know. So this is interesting. On the screen, he has embed such points in the very language which he uses, and uses linguistic echoes and structural similarities. Well, what do you think Dennis MacDonald's doing in all of his work? He finds the verbal.
Now he can say it's true. Right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing how his worldview, Michael Jones's entire worldview, will shift when he needs a point to be on his side.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden mimesis is a thing in his worldview. Now he likes linguistic echoes and structural similarities.
Yeah.
Because he's trying to make a point about Jesus in the Old Testament. But if we about Jesus in the Bacchae, all of a sudden, no, that's not a thing. That's not real.
Good point. Good point. And your point about Virgil, again, echoing that again, is to say he doesn't mention Homer. There's no, I'm doing this Homer thing. Everyone knew that.
Yeah.
When you're reading this original
Aeneas is from Homer.
They know this. So the only, I will grant, the characters of the New Testament are not. They're in a Jewish context. So it's not as easy for someone, especially not learned on Homer or Euripides, to catch these signals, and if you don't know the language. But when you see the signals and the linguistic overlap, and you start to recognize tropes and themes that are clearly there, at least, I beg of people like Jones to at least recognize that they're peppering illusions to this. Give the minimum of cultural illusion of mythos being painted onto Jesus. If you can do that, bravo. If you can't do that, I don't know how to help you. At the end of the day, though, you can go the step further and say Dennis MacDonald, which is the literary, and I like to play with that.
And Nicholas Horsfall note Virgil borrowed from Roman legends to paint the current event of his days. Bruce Molina and Richard Rohrbaugh say to be able to quote the tradition from memory, to apply it in creative or appropriate ways, not only brings honor to the speaker, but lends authority to his words as well. Luke 1 is an example. It is stitched together from phrases of Psalms 41, 111, 132, 105, 106, Micah 7. The ability to create out such a mosaic implied extensive, detailed knowledge of the tradition and brought great honor to the speaker able to pull it off.
So once again, mimesis and drawing parallels and drawing from motifs of the Old Testament, fair game. But remember who the audience of the Gospels are. It's the Gentile world. So so this exact same point applies. Not only brings honor to the speaker, but lends authority to his words as well. If I'm a gospel author and I'm writing to people who are in Dionysian groups, Aphrodite groups, Attis groups, worshippers of Athena, worshippers of Serapis, I'm going to speak to them and try to capture their hearts and minds using imagery that they love. Clement of Alexandria does this in his Patrepticus, where he sort of flips the Dionysian on its head and makes the Maenads into disciples and says that Orpheus' song is Jesus' song, singing the new song of salvation.
Right.
Or he says that Sabazius is a countersign. Sabazius being in the bosom of the Father is a countersign to the mysteries of Christ, because Sabazius is Dionysus and Zeus as a godhead. So you see them using imagery to get to the people in the Greco-Roman world.
Right.
But this is another example of that for the Jewish world.
And Jones would even jump on those church father illusions probably to say they're trying to win out the Gentile world. What do you think the New Testament is doing?
Bingo.
The important point here is that, like, even if, like, Derek is right and they are like, the gospel authors are so, like, influenced by Dionysus, that doesn't mean anything Jesus did is a myth. They could just be like, Jesus turned water into wine. We should parallel that to a Dionysus account to show how much better he was. None of that would mean this is a myth. So going back to my point that, like, even if you can get steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, you still don't actually get step 5. In this case, showing Jesus is legendary.
So I'm surprised that he's that fundamentalist that he thinks the water and the wine thing actually happened. Interesting. whatever, man.
Yeah.
I don't
You're
judge
talking
you for
about
it.
Dionysus.
But I have conversations with John Dominic Crossan and others, Dale C. Allison Jr., who don't necessarily think that these miracles happened, but they're written in a way to sort of glorify his name and say he was a great person.
Right.
So, like, the fact that he's like, Jesus probably turned water into wine, and then that reminded them of Dionysus. It's so backwards. It's just
funny.
so backwards.
You literally are making a point. John Dominic Crossan is viewing Jesus kind of like the JFK and Camelot example that Jones gave, or he has a Midas touch, or she's a modern day Robin Hood. He is looking at him as a moral example of a great moral teacher that has something to provide for him. That's, I would say, an accurate approach if you're going to see Jesus in light of these things. Instead of saying this miracle happened, but Dionysus miracles, those didn't happen. Is Jones saying that Dionysus miracles happen? If he is, at least he's opening up the door and being consistent in spirituality and the openness of, like, I believe in the miraculous. If he's saying they didn't happen, but then he's saying Jesus's did, which he's kind of indicated that with the Titan and Titanic kind of analogy, which falls apart, and I have a video coming on that. Like, it's just not consistent. It's just not consistent. So he wants 1 through 4, he's willing to grant. 5, we don't care about because we're not even drawing that Jesus didn't exist. But he wants to equate it with legend, that we have to prove it's legend. Come on, man. Do I have to prove it?
It is interesting that he's granting you 1 through 4, and that's all you're claiming to begin with.
That's
you
it.
never claimed 5 anyway.
Never claimed 5.
So that's like a win for you, dude.
Yeah, but he even goes...
you could almost end it there. I'm just kidding. But I'm just saying that he literally is handing you the W by saying that.
Well, he, I think, tries to backpedal and say, I'll only grant him 1 later. I think he mentions this in the video. So I just want a few notes on this. Again, you brought up an example of Medea and the Cretans are always liars. Well, this is the difficulty. Scholars have long noted the authors of the Gospels would have been in the know of the literature like Homer. We talked about that. But I know the only way Jones will bite on number 4, which is the key, in my opinion, to get that transition of causal link. He needs a, hi, thus saith the prophet Isaiah. You know who to open up now to the prophet Isaiah. Thus say Jonah. Thus say, like, they need those steps. Well,
because the Gentiles don't know those texts.
Bingo.
They know about Euripides. They know about Aeschylus. They know about Homer. They don't know Isaiah. By the way, if you need any more proof, if you need proof of this, am I just making this up?
No.
Because Saint John Chrysostom in the 6th century, you know what he's complaining about?
What?
These people in Constantinople, they love to go to watch the tragedies. They know every word of Euripides. They know every word of Homer. But when I try to get them to recite Psalms, they have no idea.
Yeah.
That's in the 6th century. That's when Christianity is thriving.
They know it's
and even in the 6th century, they're still fans of Homer. They're still going to watch the plays. They're still going to watch the chariot races.
Right.
They love their ancient pagan roots. But we're talking about in the late first, early 2nd century. You think they know Isaiah and Philippi? You think they know about Jonah in Pergamum? No.
Absolutely not.
That just solves that for you.
Mic drop.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've had scholars come on who are Pauline academics, and I can put them on the screen here for you, that have actually pointed out that even Paul's audience, which they get into Paul's letters, Paul's audience doesn't know scripture. And the way that Paul does things with his scriptural, arguments and trying to make cases, like anyone who was reading that material would have caught him and go, dude, that's not what it says. However, I want to give examples, some clear, explicit ones that we're not talking about illusions or mimesis where they're not going to buy it without the clear, hi, I'm advertising. But these are important ones that anyone would have known, and you can actually check these yourself. We can get out of the rabbit trail of New Testament Greek text, Paul's syncretism, right? We talked about, for in him we live, we move, and have our being, which is Epimenides of Crete, which is borrowing from the Medea myth.
Right.
Okay. Now we have Eretes of Soli. This is all in Acts 17 for those who don't know. From the 3rd century BC, these are pagan writings. Your own poets have said, Paul says, we are his offspring, talking about Zeus. So that brings to mind.
So he's citing a pagan author, which you said he doesn't do.
The New
Testament citing it's just, he says things that are objectively, not even like his opinion is off. He's objectively being wrong about this stuff.
So clear,
Yeah.
so obvious. It brings to mind the authors share a shared heritage deep into the past with statements about Zeus and Yahweh. We got into Yahwism with Gad Barnea. We could look to Titus 1:12. You brought this up. Cretans are always liars. We could turn to Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:33, where he says, bad company corrupts good character. That's a quote. This is a direct quotation from a Greek playwright, Menander's comedy, Thais. Take 1 Timothy 6:13, a God who gives life to all, end quote. This is Cleothenes' hymn to Zeus. This Stoic hymn praises Zeus as the source of life and order, concepts echoed in early Christian descriptions of God as the giver and sustainer of life. There are so many philosophical and even mythical allusions, such as the people of Lystra mistake Paul and Barnabas for Hermes and Zeus in Acts. A story reflecting Greco-Roman myths where gods visited mortals in disguise, very much like Ovid's Metamorphosis. The phrase, it is hard to kick against the goads, in Acts 26:14 is widely believed.
Euripides Bacchae. And he was asking, he literally said, they're not quoting from Euripides Bacchae. He literally says that in this video.
Of course.
And he's wrong.
He'll find a scholar who will go, oh, it's an allusion or a common phraseology culturally. I don't care.
It doesn't matter. It's still from Euripides.
Still from it.
But that's one of those things that, like, it's kind of a question begging fallacy, because
Bingo.
It's in the reason why it's a common phraseology is because of Euripides. Duh.
It's so,
you're just reiterating what I said in different words.
It's so contextually relevant too, because kicking against the goads, for those who don't know, the viewer might not know what that even means, right? It refers to an ox resisting its driver by kicking against a sharp stick to prod it forward. Such resistance only harms the ox itself.
Right.
This image symbolizes futile rebellion against a higher power, an idea that is fitting for both Euripides' context, Pentheus' resistance to Dionysus, and Paul's context in Acts, his persecution of Christians, and the Jewish persecution of Christians in opposition to Jesus.
Even the word hypocrite itself comes from the Greek playwriters, because the Hippocrate is someone who puts on a mask and pretends it's something else. So for them using that word to come out of Jesus' mouth, he either definitely didn't say that, or if he did say that, he was very Hellenized.
Yep.
Because there is a theater over there. So maybe he did say it. I'm just saying.
Absolutely. No. This is why I love doing this stuff with you, because we're going to look, we're going to try and connect dots that may not be there. That's right. Okay. It's not a sin, ladies and gentlemen, to attempt to think and flex your mind and try to use those pattern recognition skills that we've all been given to see they speak Greek, they're writing in Greek. It's a shared culture, a shared language. It's shared location geographically. There is Hellenism. Everyone's been tainted, or if you will, influenced by it. Why aren't we at least making attempts to do so? Why are we isolating with that kind of, well, this is Jewish and only Jewish? Did you not know the Jews were already fully Hellenized by this period? It's important you do that. Neal, I'll tell you this, I have way too much material for this video, so forgive me, Jones, if I don't thoroughly exhaust encyclopedia knowledge on everybody to give all the concrete evidence, but I'm just going to go through, I think this is important, just the Dionysian gospel outline, not the arguments, because Neal will be here all night. Okay. These are the parallels that are drawn between John's gospel through Dennis MacDonald's work. And
he's the one bringing up mimesis for the Old Testament, so why not?
We might as well. So, and you can cut me off and comment as you go.
Go ahead.
Okay, Gospel of John 1:1-5, origin of the Logos, right? We know that this is the divine word, Euripides Bacchae. I'm not even going to mention the Bacchae. I want to say, get the book, okay? But I'm going to just mention, right? The witness to the divine, Gospel of John 1:6-8. Rejection of the divine. It came to his own did not receive him. Both stories. The divine taking human form, obvious. Divine intimacy and connection. The Father, the Son is in the lap of the Father.
You use the same exact word, yeah.
Exact same Greek word. You want linguistic connections? Read Dennis MacDonald's work. I'm planning on learning Greek. Neal's been pushing me, and I know I've been kicking against the goat.
Kicking against the goat.
So here we are, right? Multiplicity of divine titles. They're titled Bacchus and this and that and Savior and Messiah and Son of God and Logos. Miracle of transformation, which we know, the changing of water to wine. Golly, this is such a biggie. And by the way, they always want to go, oh, it's just wine. It's a ubiquitous thing. So here's a Samaritan woman in the wilderness who's thirsting. and there's a Maenad in the wilderness, and her thirst strikes the rock.
No wonder why Herodotus thought Dionysus was the god of the Levant. He thought that's what he thought. He thought the only gods worshipped was Aphrodite and Dionysus, which a lot of people think is Yahweh and Asherah.
So it's so much overlap. Again, cleansing the temple, avenging the Father's house, renewal through divine interaction, an old man seeks rejuvenation. So Jesus finds a man who cannot walk, 37 years of age. He heals him permanently, whereas Dionysus temporarily through wine makes him drunk so he doesn't feel any pain, and he feels young again, and he starts to dance.
Right.
Okay. The exaltation of the divine, the Son of God must increase. This is exactly what, when you get into the Cadmus account in Euripides, he wants...
Cadmus is also introduced as like the vine. He's like the foliage of the vine, but not the true vine.
Right.
And and then John the Baptist, he's like the light, but not the true light.
Bingo. I'm glad you're picking up on this
Yeah.
easily. And you've read his book too, so cheating a little bit, you know.
I've read the book.
Offering life through water. Again, that's that woman account that talks about the donor of living water. And he knows she's promiscuous. Well, guess what the accusation of the Maenads are in the Bacchae? They've gone and they've worked in other men's beds to please other men, that they are sexual. Well, she goes, I have no husband. He goes, you're right. You have 5 husbands. And the one you're with now. Dude, it's so awesome when you see this.
Yeah.
That's why, like, I don't care what the apologists do at the end of the day, man. Y'all want to stay stuck in your little hole and do your little thing and get, you know, I love the Bible, and you're not going to take that from me.
Right.
Just saying.
I think we like it better than they do.
I know we do, don't we? So healing miracles, the healings of the royal official son, renewal and healing. An old cripple walks again. This is another account. Union with the divine through consumption, eating the flesh of the Son of God. I almost want to read that section, but we don't have time.
We already touched on it too, though.
We've already touched on it. Yeah. Divine elusiveness. Jesus escapes arrest. Do I need to explain how Dionysus escaped? I might need to. The audience doesn't know this. While he tried to make me look crazy, we might as well comment on this, but it gets into a video later that goes into the Pleiades and the stuff like that. I'm going to stop there and just say there's like 15
We have it on the screen for them to see it.
Yeah,
you pause it and read it.
You see all of this, pause it, read it, and read the book. Buy the book.
Yeah.
So I go in and wasted a lot of time prepping for this video to give even thorough arguments in each of these examples. And Neal's looking at me like, dude, you're crazy. And I am a little crazy, and I'm okay with that.
No, that's a good point, though, because Dennis really does show this with good methodology, and he's more resistant to parallels than you and me are.
I know.
Which is funny, because he's the one writing this book, but then we come to him all the time, and Dennis, what do you think about this? No, that's too much. Like, he's very careful.
Very resistant.
It's very hard to get him to think that there's a parallel.
But does Dennis even believe every connection he made is the case?
No. He just says, look, this is here, it's possible.
Yeah.
He just wants people to notice that there's stuff.
He says this could
possible things here.
That's it. He's not dogmatic. He said they have something so Dennis McDonald explains mimesis. They have something they like to say. They look for types that are successful and promising, and whether they want their reader to recognize it or hide it, for them to discover themselves. So sometimes they advertise, which is the problem with Olaf Sandnes and Margaret Mitchell's critique of Dennis MacDonald. They expect mimesis to only be advertised. Whereas Dennis says, no. Oftentimes, and Tim Whitmarsh agrees with Dennis MacDonald on this, they would oftentimes kind of make you the reader.
Yeah, they do not. That's not what Virgil's doing.
Right.
So Virgil's the prime example of mimesis and drawing from Homer, never mentions Homer.
Doesn't mention Homer.
So whoever said that is just objectively wrong.
I think everyone knows it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And it may not be as obvious here for some, but when you're dealing with this, it's so much, man. Sometimes they advertise it, sometimes they disguise it in an innovative and creative way. They will syncretize or parallel the narrative, often differing the narratives. So first, choice for model for the narrative. Create the reader, something with a number of similarities, right? Which is the glue holding the syncresis. So the syncresis showing similarities then capitalizes on the differences. It's complex, but that's how they wrote back then. And if you did carbon copy, plagiarism, or these copycat identical things that they expect to be the case if mimesis is happening, then, or some form of it that they're trying to like strawman us with zeitgeist, that would not work. An ancient reader would read this and go, this is bunk. We could go read the original source. When you do something unique and different, that's what makes that text stand out and makes it really why the Gospels are so creative and great. So a couple more things he says. He calls it philological fundamentalism. is what the apologists are doing. You need to have a number of certain words as direct imitation, almost verbatim, to be persuaded.
With a citation on it.
With a
Like,
citation.
I borrowed this from Euripides. This is not how culture works.
This is not at all. That's why I turned to Michael Jones. What criteria are you asking for in order to make a causal?
I just watched a music video the other day, Lil Dicky, where he comes in the room with a Joker mask on.
Yeah. He's
being the Joker. Never in the video does he stop and go, "I'm the Joker from Batman from 1945 from the comic book that came out in that day."
No.
You can see the Joker, you know it's the Joker, and there's nothing that needs to be said.
Bingo. So I wrote a little funny thing where I was like, it sounds like your criteria is so restrictive that it would rule out countless other accounts that the scholars have long noticed between those narratives and the ancient canonical examples, like Homer, Euripides, etc., excluding them since they don't flat out talk about what you said with Virgil. Hi, I'm borrowing from Homer or Euripides to write this story. Example. Did you know that Josephus frequently imitates Homeric poetry, though he never says once?
Everyone does.
That's
right.
what he's
I'm not
doing.
surprised at all.
He isn't even advertising them. Several scholars have long noticed this and documented this. He paraphrases the Bible in antiquities and in some places even uses Homer to fill the gaps sometimes even word affinities. If you expect a vivid advertisement rather than allusion or affinity to the likely literary model, then no classicist will buy your criteria. You've ruled out every classicist in the field. They will not buy your criteria. Your 1 through 4 or 5 is bunk.
It is. It's completely. It's a straw man to begin with.
To nail the coffin closed, academics such as Dennis McDonald point out that the New Testament needed to advertise the scriptures. Why? You said it earlier. Why do they need to say Isaiah has written or thus it is written? Why do they do that?
Because the Gentile audience is not familiar with the scriptures. They want to be heard. They want to be told when it's a prophecy.
They want to know.
And it really gives it the messianic authority when you say, "Thus it was written." So that's not going to happen with the Gentile stuff. It's just not going to happen that way.
No, and that's a powerful point. As Hegel said, he pretty much says is the air they breathed, which I know he's more of a modern philosopher, but Pseudo-Heraclitus said in the 1st century AD, contemporary to Mark, Luke, that Homer, they nurtured on it from cradle to grave. In the catalog of literary papyri in Egypt, 200 BC to 200 AD, we have 5 fragments or 6 fragments of the LXX. And we have over 600 of Homer. Dennis says, you tell me what book the reader of the Gospel of John would have had accessible. LXX or some of Homer or even Plato.
And also on top of that, in the Dead Sea, not the Dead Sea Scrolls, in Masada, which is considered to be part of the Dead Sea, it's, from the same contemporary world, they find Virgil and Plato and Homer manuscripts there. They're with the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Down in the Dead Sea world, among these old ancient Hebrew manuscripts and Aramaic manuscripts, there's Greek and there's Latin. There's Virgil and there's Plato right there. The same sources that you and I have been arguing that they're drawing from.
Right.
They're in their hands, being copied from them. Same with the Nag Hammadi scrolls. You find Zoroastrian texts. By the way, he said it's the Zendavestus 3rd century. Well, guess what? Among these early Christian 2nd century, some of them even we'll say 2nd century texts.
Yeah.
Among these texts, you find fragments of Plato's Republic. So that's one of them. And then another one is a text called Asclepius, which is a Hermes Trismegistus speaking to Asclepius. That's found among early Christian groups. The text called Zostrianos, which is a Zoroastrian treatise of the grandfather of Zoroaster, Zostrianos, among early Christian groups. And last but not least, the one that really got me, kind of blows my mind a little bit, is the Sentences of Sextus the Pythagorean. So they have Pythagorean philosophy Pythagorean philosophy, Plato, Zostrianos, the Zoroastrian, Hermetic, Asclepius text among the early Christian, the oldest Christian manuscripts we have. You find those among them.
Why?
What does that tell you?
Yeah.
Because this is a Gentile world. This is what they read.
Exactly. And they're also modeling their philosophy, which they're highly influenced off of in that world.
Pythagorean, Platonic. And then, like I said, even if you want to say those are heretics, you still have to explain why in Masada among these Hebrew Old Testament manuscripts do we find Plato and Virgil,
Yeah.
Latin and Greek.
I mean, there's so much here.
Right.
So I have a little bit of a long section here
Go
on
ahead.
Richard C. Miller. Miller's been
He kills it.
we need to shout him from the rooftops. This guy needs it. I mean, we're always going to do it for Dennis, but like Richard, his book is dense and super, super intelligent and really well
Absolutely.
done. So he nails this number 4, in my opinion. And this is so closely to the Jesus story that I want you to comment on it. So his book is Resurrection and Reception in Early Christianity, and he has a section called Excursus, Archetypal Mimesis, and Matthew's Divine Birth Myth. And he says, forgive us in advance for this technical, excellent, very, very brilliant piece, but it's very important you pay attention. As a subset of the larger rubric, archetypal mimesis, fictive archetypal embellishment, particularly regard to the divine birth and divine translation, often function to embroider the beginning and endings of a biographic narrative. So at the beginning and end of a life, they would embellish, okay? Tacitly invoking these same powerful associations. Perhaps the most vivid manner to describe such literary phenomena is by way of example. In apropos, excursus allows for the application and observation of the methodologies herein proposed, namely, a look into the archetypal patterns applied to the divine birth myth found in the Gospel of Matthew. It is indeed striking that the Romans have composed most every extant ancient source on the life of Alexander the Great. From the time of Scipio Africanus through the late ancient emperors, the textualization of Alexander served to calibrate Roman imperialism, Roman imperial cult, and the narrative and biographies of these emperors. Just as previously discussed, each great general or emperor measured himself against Alexander, seeking through propaganda and imitatio to match his achievements while avoiding his degeneracy. They don't want to look bad like him, okay?
Yeah, that's the old Homeric way. By the way, Alexander, according to Aristotle, kept a book, a Homer's Iliad copy that was handwritten by Aristotle with commentary by Aristotle in the margins. It was given to Alexander for his campaigns in the East, and he slept with it under his pillow. So he's a Homeric-minded guy, but you're right. Later on, people still want to borrow from him and draw from him, but they want to do it in a more
we don't be drunk,
more middle Platonic, Stoic way, not the Homeric way.
Exactly. Alexander's legacy had so determined Hellenistic governance in the Levant and Egypt that all aspiring rulers of the region were invariably measured by the looming stature and strategic disposition of the man. Matthew's divine king affords no exception. Classicists have typically neglected the details of this phenomenon, instead interrogating the ancient sources with the pointed hope that the historical Alexander would eventually show himself. Sound familiar? While, as with the quest for the historical Jesus, such an enterprise may appear quite worthy and alluring, scholars of both spheres have often overlooked the promise that these narratives hold for enriching our understanding of the context in which and for which they were produced. In both cases, Jesus and Alexander, readers endeavor to see beyond the mythic figure to some flesh and blood person, all the while failing to note that such text deliberately favored the myth to the real, and for good reason. The conscription of these cultural political icons served the pressing social needs of later context to such a degree that any historical person becomes elusive, perhaps even irrelevant. What mattered was the fabulation. That is, how the textualized, mythologized Jesus or Alexander functioned culturally, socially, and politically. Yep. While this is certainly the case with our extant sources for Alexander, it becomes all the more visible with the charged mythiopic, I can't even pronounce it, renditions of Jesus in the early Christian literary production. Plutarch and Arrian serve as the two chief sources for Alexander the Great. Plutarch's Vita Alexandri, a work precisely contemporaneous with Matthew's final redaction, displays the following birth narrative for the king. And it goes in, this is the narrative, that Alexander, with regard to his lineage, on his father's side was a descendant of Heracles through Caranus, and on his mother's side was a descendant of Acus, A-E-A-C-U-S, Acus, through Neoptolemus, is among those things entirely trusted. And it is said that Philip, after being initiated into the mysteries on Samothracia, together with Olympias,
Told you. They're married there. And same with Rachel. I've been talking about that forever.
You have, bro. You've been hitting this so hard for a while. And while he was but a youth and an orphan, fell in love with her, and so betrothed her, having persuaded her brother Olympus. Then the night before they were to consummate the marriage, the bride thought, while there was lightning, that a thunderbolt had fallen upon her womb. From the blow, a fire was ignited. Thereby, as it broke into flames, the fire scattered in all directions. This is exactly what happened with Augustus later. Later, with the wedding, Philip saw himself in a dream placing a signet impression on his wife's womb. The emblem of the signet, as it seemed, had the image of a lion, while the other emblem of the signet... while the other diviners were distrusting the vision, namely that they needed a more careful guard for Philip of those who attended the wedding. Aristander of Telemesos said that she conceived a man, for nothing seals those things that are empty, and that she conceived a child who was courageous and as a lion by nature. There then appeared a serpent as Olympus slept, stretched out alongside her body. They say that this most of all quenched Philip's love and fondness for her, such that with her he did not often have sexual relations as they lay with her, either because he feared, and I'm probably misreading that because I don't think he had sexual relations while she was pregnant. But anyway, it could be just not often. Anyway, so he goes, avoid intercourse, and since she was joined to one greater than himself. Look at the similarities between Alexander and Matthew. A parental genealogical description placed at the beginning aimed at signifying the respective hero via an established pedigree. A betrothed juvenile couple who are in love. The interruption by the deity of the wedding betrothal process, impregnating the bride through his signature principal element, namely Zeus's thunderbolt, or fire, or Yahweh's sacred wind, pneuma. The virginal conception and birth of the hero child, the surrogate father, abstains from sexual relations until the womb is opened through the birth of the child, namely the break of the seal. Drama over the sexual fidelity of the bride and legitimacy of the conception. A distrust of the woman's account of the child's conception, precipitating the need for the groom's divine dream, thus restoring confidence in the bride's story. A prophetic description of the child given in the groom's dream, establishing supreme expectation regarding the destiny of the child. A later association with magic, though perhaps applied differently. Also resembling Matthew's Magi Orientalis, Cicero in the 1st century BC provided the following legend, also available in Plutarch in Alexander 3.3. On the same night, when Diana's temple at Ephesus was burned, it coincided that Alexander was born from Olympus. And when the daylight had come, Magi cried out that the prior night there had been born the plague and demise of Asia. The true story proceeded for Matthew's account, offering an additional cue for the reader, casting the protagonist as Alexander's mimetic successor. Matthew's Parthian sorcerers, moreover, helped to expand the religio-cultural appeal of the praise-sung hero, thus reflecting the broadening program of Matthew's community in the Levant. Both Olympias and Alexander's hired protagonist, historiographer Callisthenes, assisted with the political mythology, and it goes on into Augustus.
Yeah.
Dude, there's so much.
You can see the birth narratives. As I mentioned, you have this a similar trope happening with Augustus, where there's a star in the sky, and the Senate has to kill all the babies because they don't want a king to be born.
Bingo.
Same thing with Mithridates, a star in the sky signifying a king will be born. He's going to unite the world. There's a grand genealogy. It's like in Matthew, where it explains how Mithridates is both born from Cyrus, but also on the Greek side to Alexander. So he's a super king guy.
Yeah.
So the tropes are all there.
It's worth noting, too, in the Iliad, Euripides, and Sophocles, the cult, the group of the god of Dionysus and his followers are persecuted. This is exactly the trend we find in the New Testament.
Are you kidding me? People are persecuted? That's exactly the same thing? No, that's generally the same thing. Many groups were persecuted.
Therefore invented.
I mean, like, it's a logical leap.
What? Oh no, like that. Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna argue against Luke, then this would be my advice to atheists or whatever. Like, do it the old-fashioned Bart Ehrman way and just say, like, Luke has some sloppiness and he contradicts himself at points and he makes historical blunders here and there, which I don't think any of those things are true. But like, you know, like actually argue against the historicity of Luke, not just there's persecution, therefore this must be obvious copying from other myths. It's just like, I mean, I hope that's just one tiny part, the tiniest of tiny parts in a cumulative case. But even then, it's so weak that it's not worth bringing up.
Yeah, it's like saying Confucius had disciples, Socrates had disciples. This is exactly the same thing. It'd be like, yeah, teachers tend to have disciples. That doesn't mean there's an actual causal link here. There's got to be more going on. But here's another example.
And bringing joy and life to all who follow him. Dionysus is more than just the god of wine. He is a force of transformation, vitality, and communal ecstasy. This transformation power later becomes pneumatic or spiritual transformation. His worshippers experienced this when they were filled by his spirit through communion with the deity, just like Jesus later possesses his followers by the Spirit.
Okay, having some form of ecstasy or possessed by the Spirit, again, very common in any religious tradition. I don't know of any religious tradition that wouldn't have something like that.
Well, I guess the Sufis were just copying from Dionysus, because
absolutely
they ecstasy and
definitely
the Pentecostals are really high on Dionysus. Can confirm.
Jewish mythicists involved in the Kabbalah. There's one. The Ahmadis as well. I mean, the Sikhs, we could just do that as well. I mean, it's just everyone must be copying that. Come on, these guys. This is what I mean about these being too general.
The first thing that I notice is that he's kind of taking you out of context, because if you watch the video up until that point, you're talking about Dionysian anyway, and you're throwing out that, look, culturally, they were very similar in how they were perceived by people, which is kind of a big deal. The Dionysians were relegated to the outcast of society, especially in Rome in 186 BCE. You have that decree by the Roman Senate that outlawed Dionysian worship. And they were relegated out to the wilderness, where they lived as basically like orgiastic monks, if you will, because they were that's how the Desert Fathers lived in the early church days. They lived out in the wilderness, and they sort of dropped out of society. Well, that's what the Dionysians were doing. And you were pointing this out on top of all the parallels that you were already bringing. So to separate that up from what you were doing is a little bit taking you out of context.
It's really taking me out of context, Neal, because first of all, I was giving general parallels. That is my point, because what we're dealing with is there's more. It's a cumulative case. There's so much more.
And then the pneumatic spirit thing was actually a really good point, because you only find that with two different groups, Dionysian and Christian. The idea that groups can get this spirit of speaking in tongues and losing yourself and having divine mania, that is only found in Dionysian and Christian groups. So he totally missed the point on that one.
Without a doubt. I mean, this is a big problem. I think he's not read up. So first of all, I mentioned the source in the video, but again, like the Clement source, he probably missed it and didn't realize. Mark W.G. Stibe, who wrote a book called John as Storyteller, Narrative Criticism, something like this. We are he's on Jupiter and I'm on Earth. He's approaching these Gospels as if they are literal, historical, this is what happened, biography, and it's like you're reading the actual history of what took place on Wednesday at 5 p.m., like that kind of thing. He is not approaching this as literary. He is approaching this as almost eyewitness. This is what happened. I am looking at this and going, this looks to be, how does the omniscient author know this? What are some of the tropes and themes that are literary tropes we find within other writings that are fictitious or somewhat semi-fictitious and historical? I am approaching this with these tools. He's approaching with this, it happened, he rose, we would have saw it on Sunday, hallelujah, praise you, Jesus. I'm going, no, hold on. Why is it that there are themes and tropes and elements that are mythic and fictional? He takes the legend or myth and makes it history. So Mark W.G. Stibe says, the Gospel of John is a tragedy. Well, if I asked you, Neal, you know this, what is one of the greatest tragedies ever in the known world?
Euripides Bacchae.
Okay, especially
or even Aeschylus. The first tragedy on record is Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound tragedy, and where you literally have a son of God sacrificing himself, chained up in a rocky cruciform style, and so there even other tragedies, you can almost see where Christ is drawing from.
Dude, he quotes so many scholars in this book, and there's no way, it's not fair that I have to edit a 5-hour video to cover everything exhaustively and bore you to death with the details. My goal with these videos is to inspire you to go look at the primary sources, to go read the scholarship. But he goes into the scholars who show it's also tragedy. They agree. The ones who have contention, he shoots it down and argues. Oedipus. They go, well, tragedies don't end on a positive note. Have you read Oedipus?
Some of them do.
Some of them do.
Yeah.
So once you know this is a tragedy.
And Prometheus's trilogy does sort of end on a positive note. He gets unchained. He's free. The last of the trilogy is Prometheus unbound.
Right.
So it does. So they can have. That's just.
But
wrong.
even Sophocles, right? This is another one. Sophocles. What's he do? He tells the persecution narrative of Lycurgus, which is the one from the Iliad. The one that's of Pentheus is in Euripides, which is not in the Iliad. So you have multiple tragedian mythos about Dionysus and his followers being persecuted.
Right.
Here's the thing. In history, did Dionysus' cult ever get persecuted?
Yes.
But in myth, did Dionysus' cult get persecuted?
Yes.
So you mean to tell me both in myth and history they were persecuted?
Right.
So is it not likely that Christians may have been persecuted, but also wrote narrative stories that are
it became
lifting?
the cool thing to be persecuted by the order. Like Socrates was persecuted, and Theophrastus was persecuted, Aristotle was persecuted, all the great thinkers were persecuted. That became the thing that everyone wanted to be. Even today,
Socrates.
Even today, you see people who really want to like, oh, I had a worse life than you did.
Yeah.
I'm more persecuted than you are.
Of course.
I identify as this. That's a thing in the modern world too. It's a thing in
Bingo.
the ancient world. Okay.
So we know that scholars have long noted Acts 17 that Paul is a new Socrates. We can go into Jesus too. That's a whole nother thing. We don't have time to get into all of it, but he's a new Socrates. He's in the very place that Socrates got into trouble at. The difference is Socrates ended up going to his death. Paul stays alive a bit longer and gets imprisoned later. But here's the thing. If I asked you, were probably Christians locked up and imprisoned?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if I asked you, were Christians locked up in prisons and earthquakes shook and angels brought them out through divine?
Yeah.
Okay. Notice how real quickly Jones wants to make that history.
Right.
Instead of saying, she had a Midas touch. It's like Camelot. Instead of saying they mythologized potentially real events in some way, but we cannot know what those things were for sure because all we have are stories about it. That goes for the shipwrecks. And what happened at the beginning while he left? Are you kidding me? With his little condescending attitude, like his little whiny, bratty attitude. Like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Like, dude, yeah, I'm kidding you. You know why? Because when they spoke in tongues and the fire took over and they were in a trance, they were being accused of being drunk by the onlookers, just like in Euripides, the Maenads who were in a trance.
Speaking in tongues, doing glossolalia, that's what they called it. They started speaking out random syllables.
Come on.
That happens in
They were
Dionysus.
accused of being drunk. The earthquakes that released them from prison. The list can go on and on. Both kings die on a hill. Yeah, one is the good guy in this narrative. One is the bad guy in this narrative. They're dying on a hill. Schola Gagatha and John, right? So you have... What I'm trying to get is Mark W.G. Steib, who wrote that book, said he didn't even try to argue literary, like he's borrowing from Euripides. That's when Dennis MacDonald in the Dionysian Gospel says, Mark W. Steib, this is his words about this very scholar I quoted. He says, he gets cold feet from going all the way. And then Dennis takes it from the cold feet to the solid. And he makes so many connections that even the scholars you say are not doing literary mimesis are saying there are allusions, illustration, there's some type of cultural diffusion happening where they are being influenced.
Right.
This is no doubt.
Yep, 100%.
I don't know. I'm at a loss of words right now.
I know. And like, again, this is parallelomania. I mean, you could do this with anything.
I know he doesn't like the word parallelomania, you know, and it's like he'll use like parallelophobia or something like that. But it's just like, you know, I could say, well, Martin Luther borrowed from the story of Achilles in the Iliad because just like Achilles refused to fight in the Iliad, and
this is a horrible, stupid, dumb example. Honestly, unless you found sources at the time of Martin Luther where they trained Protestant scribes and Catholic scribes to specifically study these sources and imitate them, that was the practice of the day, then you might have something going. Just trying to like act like we're an idiot.
Right. What you and I find, we find like the general first top layer parallels, but then we find dates matching up. We find sequence of events matching up. We find words being said, linguistic matching up. What he's trying to say now is just kind of just he's.
It's like a German Protestant or Catholic turned Protestant guy in German in way later, not under the Roman Empire with the same similar cultural kind of issues going on.
It's a total different world at that point.
That is, I agree. We could find parallelomania, and we know what parallelomania is. We're dealing with a culture that is actually living and breathing in the legends of the Greco-Roman imperial cult, which is breathing in the legends and the myths of the well-known Greco-Roman and other.
Right.
I mean, dude, golly, this is ridiculous. I can't even believe I get accused of parallelomania, of course.
Go somewhere off in the left field.
We could see structural and thematic similarities with John's gospel.
What? I'm sorry, what? What similarities beyond vague generalities? Eric, help me out. I'm confused.
Well, you already went through this with Dennis. You did the whole section on this, so we don't have to really repeat
that. That was the concrete version. Mark W.G. Stibe is the one who's not even doing the full Dennis approach in mimetic literary, but he's the one who said thematic and like linguistic similarities and the whole thing.
Just explain that.
So what similarities? Jones,
we just explained
read a book.
Right.
I mean, dude, you don't have to agree.
Also, William Atridge talks about the Gospel being John being a tragedy as well.
Bingo. So, he calls them a drama too, and that was quoted in Dennis's book.
Yeah. So this is not like something you're making up or anything like that. This is something, and you've already demonstrated for like a very well written out segment on Dennis's work. So we don't have to keep doing that.
No, we do not.
We get that.
I think we need to go to you.
So what is the theory about Yahweh having a wife that was Asherah? So yes, at one point the Israelites decided God needed a wife. And the prophet said, you were wrong, that is stupid. So yeah, it definitely happens in ancient Judea. It's in the biblical text where we have direct evidence for them doing that and being condemned. So just like you have with Christians preaching Jesus as God, you had other groups come out later called the Gnostics that preached a weird combination of Greek mythology, some of their own ideas blending with Christianity. And they were condemned as heretics. Likewise, according to the biblical narrative, the ancient narrative is that God reveals himself. The Israelites rebel and syncretize him with other gods, reduce his glory, thinking he needs a wife, and the prophets are sent to condemn that. So, yes, we can acknowledge the ancient Israelites thought God needed a wife and say, duh, that's what the Bible says they were doing, and it was wrong. It was condemned by the prophets.
All right, so first of all, addressing the Asherah thing, he's got the chronology way off. So he has an axiom. The Bible has to be true no matter what, and any history has to come secondary. So instead of looking at Ugaritic sources where Asherah and Baal are already there, they didn't introduce Asherah after the Ugaritic text.
No.
So Yahweh gets merged into the El cult in Jerusalem. They already had Asherah there. The archaeology proves this. Ask Jonathan Adler. Ask Gad Barnea. Ask Israel Finkelstein. Ask any of the leading archaeologists in Israel about this. Asherah was there before Yahweh. Yahweh got introduced to Asherah, if anything. And Asherah didn't go away and then come back later by some heretics. That's you. You just made that up for whatever reason to fit the historical narrative to see how do I deal with this and make the Bible true. Then he also compares it to the Gnostics, who called the Gnostics. Only a very few groups called themselves Nostoi, knowers. They didn't all call themselves that. They called themselves Christians. They were just heretics. They didn't.
According to only a certain group,
and only certain groups introduced Greek philosophy and mythology into the mix too. Some of these Nostoi or heretics were on the Judaic side, believe it or not. So he doesn't have any idea about Gnosticism, nor does he have any idea about the chronology of Jewish religion, Judean religion, I should say, of Asherah worship. She was there the whole time and then taken out probably around the 3rd century BC.
Right. We've been talking about that with Gad Barnea, but what's interesting about what you said is, from my takeaway of Jones, is that he is looking at the Bible
as
and
history.
Whatever the Bible says, what that author is saying, that's true. Again, like you said, the axiom is the Bible. So what does the New Testament teach? Well, as long as the New Testament teaches this, anything I find outside of that.
For this?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, please.
So, as we both know, that Jonathan Adler points out that there's no widespread observance of Judaism until the 150s. That means the average Joe who these laws are written for
BC
don't know about any of this stuff until the Maccabean period,
Right.
when it becomes law of the land. So Jones will say, well, it was just the priesthood in Jerusalem that were trying to keep this, and they're trying to get it out there, but there was heresy, and he'll think of some reason to get around
Always.
it. However, he gets disproven immediately by looking at coins issued in Jerusalem. The people who issued the coins in Jerusalem was the intelligentsia, the elite class. That's who minted coin. That's who controlled the monetary system.
Yeah.
Guess who minted their own face on a coin in around 410 BCE? The Judean high priest of Jerusalem.
That's right.
He's the high priest of Jerusalem doesn't even know about Torah law. Says you cannot make graven images of anyone except
No living object.
yeah. So they don't even have
being.
Torah. So this proves that your chronology that Moses came along and wrote the Torah in 1300 BCE, and then they had this struggle all the way down until Jesus, is false. It's not historical. This is why when he said earlier in this video,
Open-minded. Which is it? Come on. This is why this documentary is so long. There's so much fluff like that, which is not only dishonest, Derek, it is downright rude to me and my audience. You want us to, you say we're equals, but then you do crap like this. Come on. Are you really treating us like we're on the same playing field?
Wake up, sheeple.
the part where he just said that you're not treating him like an equal, that you're looking down on him. This is the exact reason why I do this to him, because you don't even have basic historiography right. Moses couldn't have wrote the Torah because Hebrew didn't even exist in that time. So your entire historiography is wrong. You don't even know when Asherah was worshipped and when she wasn't worshipped. You're just using the Bible as history and making everything else fit in between. That's why I can't take you seriously.
So they'll say the Israelites are actually Canaanites. Yeah, they'll make this argument. We'll say there's definitely similarities between the Israelites and the Canaanites. They share a common culture. You know, the Israelites live in Canaan. They have similar culture with the Canaanites. So we would expect that some of the Israelites were descended from Canaanites, because, you know, Judah took a Canaanite woman. Sometimes the Israelites did breed with the Canaanites, so we should expect that the descendants of Israel should have Canaanite DNA in there. So that shouldn't be an issue.
You go, they'll make this argument as if, who's they? Scholars?
Yeah.
Because that's who scholars are saying.
We're not even in the mythicist category
Right,
anymore,
Israelites are the Canaanites, so they're the same people. There was obviously a name for a group of people within Canaan as Israelites. It's fine. We could do that. We could parse this out. But the culture is widespread.
Yeah.
The Judeans or the Israelites, whatever you want to call them, they were polytheistic up until like the Hellenistic era, as the evidence shows. They speak the same language as the Canaanites. They live in the same cities as the Canaanites. The idea that you could separate them and make them, one of them is the evil Canaanites, and these are the glorious Israelites, is completely ahistorical.
It's anachronistic, and it's based on the voice of the Bible. That's what he wants.
He even grants that they're genetically the same. They speak the same.
Like
they live in the same.
They walk
like a duck, talk like a duck. It's a damn duck.
Yeah, and I would even go to the geneticist and DNA and all that kind of stuff. Like, I'm not the guy for that, but like, he isn't either. But
he's the one granting all that. So you grant all the things that make someone, and then saying, but they're still not because I said so.
Yeah.
It's just nonsense.
So the question is did it evolve? Did polytheism evolve slowly into monotheism by reducing gods? That's just not how religions work. I mean, you look at like the Arabia. It didn't go from polytheism to a few gods and then eventually Islam. It was polytheism and then Islam, revolutionary like movement that took over. Same with a lot of like Hinduism. It's been polytheistic for generations. No evidence of evolving slowly into monotheism. That's just not how religions work. There's revolutionary changes that happen overnight, not slow progression, evolution type thing. So when some biblical scholars say, well, yeah, the biblical religion slowly evolved out of polytheism, it doesn't fit any model I can really think of.
All right, so he's absolutely wrong. Number one, he was wrong about Arabian religion, because the centuries leading up to Islam, Christianity and Judaism were on the rise there. Even their pagan religions had some sort of monistic bent, where all the 365 gods are sort of under one. And so that's actually just completely wrong. It wasn't overnight they went from complete polytheism, like barbaric polytheists, into Islam overnight. No. As I mentioned, Christianity, Islam, Manichaeanism was spreading throughout that part of the world. The Mandaeans were over there as well, and they influenced what became Islam. So did Zoroastrians. Zoroastrians were all over Persia and Arabia, influencing Islam. So it didn't just happen overnight that they were complete barbaric polytheists.
You're buying into the narrative too.
He's buying into the Islamic narrative.
It's
crazy.
It's really interesting because I just interviewed a cutting edge like this guy's an epigrapha, absolute bona fide scholar. He points out that finding polytheism in Arabia, you might have to go to like 3rd century AD, but like maybe 4th after that. Monotheism.
Yeah.
Everyone's monotheist. So you have Jews, Christians, and then there's this other group that like can be one God.
It's like Mandeans and Zoroastrians blending into each other.
But they're monotheist.
It's what becomes Islam, basically.
Right.
It's the proto-Islam, and you could see it.
Right.
You could see it in the record. You could see it in the sources. He doesn't know this, obviously. Oh, I agree with him that it's not a linear timeline that from polytheism into monotheism. There are parts in history, for example, the Vedas.
Right.
The Vedas is polytheistic, but it also has a Brahmin creator who's the one that it's almost like Plato's demiurge. So there always was this monism trend all over the place, going all the way back to the Iron Age, even before that with Optimism. There always was little pockets of monotheism or henotheism or even monism. But the ultimate trend does seem to have, like, at the end of the day, you do see a sort of a going away from the more polytheistic towards the monotheistic. Sol Invictus was more monistic. Sol Invictus was this supreme god in Mithraism or whatever. So you do see there is a trend that does lead in that direction, but it's not completely linear.
Right.
There's some bouncing going on.
If we had archaeological,
but he's still wrong though. He still gets it wrong.
It would be amazing if we found 4,000 or 5,000 year old archaeological, like monotheistic, cultic practices, but we don't.
Yeah.
Everything going that far back from Egypt and Mesopotamia or any of the cults that we have discovered are polytheistic societies.
Absolutely.
There is no monotheism there. So
there's never a pure monotheism ever.
Right.
It's always I always call it monistic. Like, what's the degree of
Until
monistic?
you get later, they do try to philosophically hone it down.
Yeah,
in Islam.
in the ancient world.
Yeah.
And even Islam starting out, it still has other spirits and deities that are within Islam. Islam is the most monistic of all.
Right.
But that's why that's why I like using the term monistic, because it's the degree of how much there's one God in control of everything.
Right.
That's what you're looking at. You're never looking at pure only one God exists. There's no daemons and angels or a devil or something. That doesn't happen anywhere. Not even Christianity, not even Islam.
Yeah, is Jesus the true myth that C.S. Lewis argued for? So that was C.S. Lewis's idea, that Jesus is similar, and quite frankly, he was just wrong. Jesus has a unique character in the history of religions. He's not similar to these pagan deities, and in his time, there were some of those ideas being put out. So it's not like he was just ignorant. It's just that was a common theme. You had James Fraser putting some of that stuff out. So, yeah, you had that basic idea, but I don't think that C.S. Lewis was right about that. No.
So he's talking about his hero, C.S. Lewis, disagreeing with him, and I just found it funny. It's like he has to keep hitting that point that Jesus is unique and special. C.S. Lewis is wrong. He's right about a lot of stuff, but he's wrong about this one because I just had a whole speech on this. So it would have been weird for him to say, yeah, I think C.S. Lewis is on something there.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a good little clip to add in there before the last one.
Absolutely. I think that this is, again, reversing. He'll act like we made it to where it's unfalsifiable, and really, is the category dealing with history the soft kind of, I guess you say this is a soft arena that we're playing in because it's a bit subjective and the tools aren't as concrete as test tubes and DNA and all that kind of stuff. But when he asks for falsifiability, I feel that he is evasive no matter what is brought. There's no way to ever get him to recognize.
Because he needs the Bible to be true.
Right.
Seriously.
I really do think that's what it's
it
boiling down to. And that's why I said what I said. I knew he would do a magic trick. He did. He didn't want my audience. He thought I didn't want my audience to see it. Well, you watch it. And then, by the way, when I sent this, I asked for Karakuni, but she's in Japan right now on vacation or something or doing work. I wanted her to watch the Osiris section to give us 2 cents. I'm sure
I think we got it good though.
Absolutely.
I mean, we are seeing a rise of neo-paganism in interesting ways. I know there's more pagans that are active online. I don't know what could happen. I don't think paganism is a religion that really can beat Christianity. I mean, just look at history. Christianity spread around the world and just beat paganism wherever it went.
Beat paganism wherever it went. As if you actually look at the history, number one, as you pointed out earlier, the idea that they were persecuted is true to an extent, but it's greatly exaggerated. Diocletian was pretty rough against them right before Constantine. And then at other times than that, there's a few little scuff marks that happen to them. Like any group, any cult's going to have their bad times and good times, like the Dionysian group, for example. It's not like they're like singled out as like the only people who got persecuted. In fact, during the reign of the Severan period, they were very much treated as like royals. The mother of Severus Alexander was a noble Christian woman. So and Philip the Arab was baptized, and they treated the Christians with great dignity. The Christians were treated great by the ruling pagan aristocracy. But what happened was, when Theodosius takes power, he decides to turn around and treat the pagans the way they claim to be treated. He shut down all the temples. He had all the statues torn down. He had all the funding stopped for all pagan religions. He neglected the mysteries, neglected the schools of philosophy, were pretty much dead by the time Justinian the Great comes along. He completely stops funding for all the pagan philosophers, all the Platonic academies. Done. And then they go into Europe and they start sacking cities and cutting down their sacred trees and outlawing all religions except for Christianity.
Yeah.
So they beat them wherever they went.
That's like
they
saying
didn't beat
Islam.
They didn't beat them philosophically. They beat them by canceling them and shutting them down.
I would argue they absorbed the world they were in, like any type of
disgusting.
Really, they evolved and became the environment they were in, and then squashed the pre-existing thing that was there.
After drawing from all this stuff, you turn around and then destroy them as if they're your enemies, and they were the ones that allowed you to be legal in the first place.
This is a fascinating point you bring up, Neal. That is how often we hear morality comes from Christianity, all these things that they argue. And when I hear them saying, I'm like, I heard that in Plato.
And they're drawing from the Stoics, they're drawing from the Cynics, they're drawing from the Pythagorean philosophy, they're drawing from Platonist philosophy.
Yeah.
They're drawing from all these schools of thought
that were already prevalent.
Epicurean, Aristotelian, all types of schools of thought that you find in Alexandria, that you find in Athens, that you find in Pergamum.
But they don't nod to them. They don't appreciate those. They want you to go, you're borrowing from us. And it's like,
but some of the early ones did. Justin Martyr nodded to Plato.
Yeah.
They did.
And not only nodded, he said Plato was a saint who's in heaven.
Right.
Bro.
The Carpocratians said that this as well. A lot of the early Christians did acknowledge, because they couldn't hide from it. They were still out there.
Right.
They're still living in that world. As soon as the Justinian rolls around, at post-Justinian, pagans are evil, demonic, worshiping devils and all this stuff. And that sort of hysteria, that's how you beat paganism wherever they were. To me, that's just like, it's just like you mentioned, it's like Muslims bragging that they went into Indian city and raided the city because they were Hindus.
Or the conquest of Islam is somehow attributed, and believe it or not, to philosophy. To many of them, they would say God was on our side. That's why we wanted.
But does Michael Jones think that Islamic philosophy is what beat out paganism in the East?
Yeah, would he say the theological arguments or somehow the morality of Islam?
Is anti-Muslim he would never say that.
Right, he wouldn't. And we're trying to be consistent and say, look, let's look at the good, chew the meat, spit out the bone. Neal, any final words from you?
Well, I mean, I think we just demonstrated fully that Michael Jones is, as he points out, that we don't treat him on the same level as I do. I know you try to be, but I kind of abandoned even attempting to do that, because he's not serious, in my opinion. He's not coming seriously. He's not trying to find the truth. He's trying to find whatever. He's shopping around for scholars that agree with him. He's disregarding scholars that don't agree with him. To me, that's the sign of a person who is not serious.
It's not even just that. like the evidence Joshua Bowen brings, there's no debate. It
He's
solidifies how the understanding.
It's dishonest.
You go with a 1967 paper instead of what the contemporary academics are showing you in the actual language you don't even have a clue about.
Right.
He even made a comment in there, and this was mentioned to me by Joshua Bowen. He goes, "Man, he acted like that something about the Sumerian, like they don't understand the Sumerian." And then Josh was like, "How much Sumerian does he know?"
None.
And
that's who you shop around for because you like what he says. But
right.
yeah, I think it's dishonest, and I'm interested to see how he responds to this.
I am too. Ladies and gentlemen, be sure to go and subscribe to Gnostic Informant. Neal Sendlak here, joining us on MythVision. If you've enjoyed this, go check it out. The previous documentary, if you didn't watch our water into wine stuff, going through primary sources, let me know what your thoughts are of that. Go check out Jones's videos and enjoy his presentation. Then go read a bunch of different academics and check it out for yourself. So we thank you, and never forget, we are MythVision, and you have just attained true gnosis.